Okay, good morning everyone and welcome to the Committee for Infrastructure. This morning we will receive some oral evidence from Northern Ireland Water providing an operational and financial update. We will also receive oral evidence from the Department for Infrastructure providing an update on Community Transport Phase 2 review. We will consider responses in relation to the Water Sustainable Drainage and Flood Management Bill. We will consider written evidence from the Department for Infrastructure on the Operation and Maintenance Resilience Review and consider 3 statutory rules and 3 proposals for statutory rules that are not subject to Assembly procedure. Anyone in the public gallery can use mobile phones and mobile devices, but they're not allowed to take photographs or video the proceedings. And if members are content, we will just move on through the agenda. And even before we get to, and there's Justin, even before we get to item 1, I'd like to welcome Lisa to the committee. You're very, very welcome. And I hope you certainly both engage with the committee and the issues that we're considering. But just to formally say you're very, 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 very welcome here this morning. And that moves us to apologies. I have apologies from Peter McReynolds and Cathal Boylan. Anyone else aware of any apologies?
Chair, it's Melissa, not Melissa.
Melissa, Melissa.
Very different names.
Melissa, yeah.
Melissa, yeah.
I probably need a level of grace there, I think. Declaration of interests, just to remind members that they need to declare any interests that they feel they should as they come up. Does anyone have any interests they wish to declare? Okay, that's fine. Okay, that takes us to chairperson's business, and I have a couple of items this morning. The first one is that there was some reporting yesterday by the BBC regarding spillages, in particular with Belfast Lock, which members will probably be aware of. And the OEP is currently investigating 2 Stormont departments and the utility regulator over the number of spills. This does appear to be an issue that is between the DFI Minister and the DAERA Minister. Just a quote from the DAERA Minister in terms of the narrative he used on GMU yesterday morning. He said that plans on bringing a separate paper in terms of the special dispensation that Northern Ireland Water has wrongfully been given since 2007, where often it is not prosecuted due to sewer pollution. And I think that needs to be addressed. And he called on the Infrastructure Minister to speak on her, quote, her role in stopping sewage being pumped into the lock. Before I make any more comment on it, does any member have anything they want to mention in regards to this investigation?
Just that it's timely and it's important, and it highlights an issue we're all unfortunately all too aware of. But yeah, I mean, I think it'll get hopefully through some direction, some outcomes to sort of to determine where we go with this, because it is just continual, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else?
Just to echo those comments as well, Chair, and also I suppose there's questions for both ministers as well. Both ministers have a role to play, DAERA and Infrastructure Minister, and I think it's important that we keep the focus on them to do more to address this issue before it has potential to get a lot worse as well.
Yeah. Justin.
Thanks, Chair. I think the big question is that it's ridiculous that NI Water can continue to pollute our waterways without consequence. What is going on?
Okay, thank you for that, Justin. I believe that Northern Ireland Water have a thing called SORPI protection, which dates back probably to 2007. I'm ready to be corrected on this. This may be something that will come up, and members will be able to ask Northern Ireland Water regarding it today. Do we have any any proposals from committee in terms of this? I mean, my suggestion would probably just be to write to both ministers asking what their plans are to try and address it. I mean, Belfast Lock, if you go high enough up, there's some great fishing. Members may know by now I'm a fisherman. And there's some great fishing as you go up that lock. As you get lower down, it's more problematic. Just because of sewage and a range of other things. But I would certainly, I'll take members' views on it, but certainly to write to both ministers and ask what they're doing to address this. Andrew?
Is there scope as well to correspond with the office, the OEP as well?
Yep.
I mean, because I think that it'll be important to be kept abreast of what their findings are and whatever recommendations they are.
Yep.
Because again, it will presumably directly affect this department and therefore this committee, I think.
Well, we could certainly write to the OEP, more than happy with that. Certainly write to the OEP and just ask them, have they got TOR for their investigation, timescales, stuff like that. More than happy with that. Militia?
Yes, just again to I know it sounds like being repetitive, but it is as a result of underinvestment historically in terms of waste management and so on, and that the Minister herself is very much committed to improving wastewater treatment and infrastructure, and I know that she continues to look for more investment, we'll say, within NI Water and that as well.
Okay. No, thank you for that, Militia. Justin?
Thanks, Chair. I have a question into the Minister on this in relation to the ongoing pollution incidents caused by NI Water, particularly during storm events. And she says that's an operational matter for NI Water. I'm just seeking clarity. What does that mean when the Minister says it's an operational matter for NI Water? Does that mean it's not her responsibility, or what does it actually mean?
Okay. Oh, and that would be, certainly that would seem to be a very relevant question to ask Northern Ireland Water this morning, Justin, in terms of you get a view from them as to what that means. But I'm more than happy to take that, as well. Anything else on Loughnane? Are members content with those actions?
Belfast Lock.
Sorry, Belfast Lock. Thanks, David.
Can I just clarify, Chair, that we're writing certainly to the DFI Minister just to say, noting recent reports and the committee asking what she's doing about it. Can I ask if we can hold off writing to the Agriculture Minister until I find out whether the Agriculture Committee is doing that, just so we're not duplicating something. If
that's fair enough.
Members are content with that. And to write to the OEP just to say that the committee welcomes the investigation and looks forward to receiving the results of that, the findings.
In terms, Michael, that's fine. In terms of the DARA committee, they may indeed do that. Will you be able to have a response now for next week? So if they're not picking that one up, I think it would be certainly legitimate to ask what level of engagement and co-working there is going on between DFI and DARA on Belfast Lock, but we'll leave that till next week. That's absolutely fine. Okay. Members content on that one?
Sure.
Justin,
just seeking clarity on that front. I do want an answer from the Minister as to what she means when she says it's an operational matter for NI Water. Not ask that question of NI Water, ask it of the Minister. When she says things are operational matters for her arm's length bodies, what does she mean by that?
Okay. Members content to write to the Minister on those lines? Yep, 100%. Okay, thanks, Justin. I'll get that sorted. The second part of Chair's business is just to comment on and bring to the committee's attention, which I'm sure you will know from your pack, that we haven't received any replies from either the DFI Minister or the DARA Minister in relation to the A5. We wrote to them 2 weeks ago. We asked them to provide officials regarding questions that we had over the Macalinden judgment on the A5, in particular paragraph 200, and we simply haven't had anything back from them. And I'll certainly take any committee views around that if anyone has anything they want to highlight.
Again, through the Chair, just as I had inform people earlier on today there that once again there was a diversion completely on the A5. The road was closed this morning as a result of another accident. And I just trust in God that no one has lost their life on the A5 as a result of this accident. But I had to divert right over onto the M2 in order to attend this meeting this morning. But again, too, it just highlights once again how important, how vital it is in terms of having this particular project delivered. And as I say, we await the decisions now of the court and that, but I do hope it will come to a satisfactory conclusion whereby that work can progress in relation to the A5 as well.
Thank you. John?
Thanks, Chair. I'm sorry to hear about the accident, and I do hope that no one was injured again, but it does not just highlight then the need for the utmost priority from both ministers that have a say in this, and it does seem somewhat frustrating, to say the least, that 2 weeks on from pretty simple questions, we would have thought that we haven't even got a holding statement reply to this committee, which is obviously the committee that scrutinises the work of that department. I just find that quite concerning, and we can't hear on one hand that it is the number one priority when it comes to capital schemes, but then on the second hand, when the committee asks legitimate questions of the two ministers, particularly the minister that we have scrutiny over, that we don't get even an acknowledgement at this stage. I find that deeply concerning.
Yep. Okay. Anyone else? Harry?
Yep. No, just to re-echo that, just what is an acceptable time? Yes, of course, we're happy to wait, and maybe there's reason for it, but maybe we could have the reasons for the delays. That'd be okay.
So, usually, Harry, we will give the departments 2 weeks, and having been in a department, that's probably a reasonable timescale for a reply. I mean, I'm certainly as frustrated, if not more so, than the deputy chair. He was quite gracious in his comments this morning. But it's our job to scrutinise the working together of, in particular, DAERA and DFI on the run-up to the judgment being made, and we don't seem to be able to do that. So my view is that, my very clear view is that this committee is being hampered in its scrutiny work by two ministers who won't engage with it. And I find that very, very disappointing. And I think that's a pretty fair summary of where we are. We're not talking about the impending appeal. We're not talking about anything that is waiting to be heard. We've had legal advice that this matter, I can't say what the legal advice was there, but what is clear is that this is not going to a jury. These are appeal judges that are actually discussing a case that has already been heard and it is in the public domain, is certainly in the public interest. I have no doubt of that. So I'm deeply frustrated and looking at options as to what this committee can do if these two departments just choose not to engage with us. I'll pause there and take Justin.
Chair, that's a very strong statement you've just made. The chair of the Infrastructure Committee has said that our committee, who are responsible for scrutinising the Department for Infrastructure, are being hampered in our roles, in our endeavours and our efforts to proceed and progress the A5 road project by the two ministers who are responsible for the delay, the Minister for Infrastructure and the Minister for DAERA. What is going on?
Well, I would love to know, Justin. I think your summary is pretty, that's my view. Committees are here to scrutinise, and part of our role in this, one of the largest infrastructure projects in Northern Ireland, obviously has been stopped. I want to be clear that the reason this committee is scrutinising it is looking at why it failed and why Justice McAlinden decided not to allow it to go ahead. If anyone watching is picking up on this late, please go to page 200, paragraph 200 of the judgment, where you will see the High Court judge dissect the interaction between DFI and DAERA, and it's incredible that he wrote wrote what he did down there. It's really clear to me. What this committee is seeking to do is try to find out what the level of engagement between DAERA and DFI was, and find out the reasons behind why Justice McAlinden said what he said. However, I stand by my comments. I can't. Well, at this point, we will see if we get something back next week. The line of defence from both ministers has been this matter of sub judice. It's coming before the courts. I don't accept that. I accept that the judgment is being appealed by a DFI minister. There's no issue about that, and it'll be. I think the hearing is in December. I'm not asking any details about that. What we are asking about is a judgment in the public domain, and the reasons why the initial decision was made. So, look, I'm happy to leave it there. We'll see if we get anything back next week. There are options for committees in this regard, but I'm happy to leave it there. But just to be clear to both ministers, I raise this every week until we have some solution around it. And look, that's at this point in time, that's all we can do. But I think there is significant public interest, and the member raised this morning rightly that the A5 is an incredibly dangerous road, and that's evidenced this morning in terms of an accident on it. So there's no question in terms of public interest on this, and it is this committee's role to scrutinise in primacy the DFI minister, but also in light of the McAlinden judgment, the interaction between the DFI minister and the DAERA minister on this issue. I'll pause there. We'll see, committee, if we get anything back next week. That's all chairperson's business. In terms of minutes, your minutes are at page 7, the draft minutes of the 19th of November. Members are content that these minutes are a true reflection of the meeting. I will sign them. Are members happy? Okay. And then we have matters arising at page 17. So you'll see at page 17 the clerk's memo on the discussions between at the Committee for Finance in regard to the negative procedure for clause 17 of the Administrative and Financial Provisions Bill. And then at page 20, the official report of the Committee for Finance on the 24th of September 2024. Now, last week we had a bit of chat about this. I think it was Cahill who suggested we consider this a little bit more fully. And as such, the committee has been provided with the Hansard from that meeting on the 24th of September. I think, and you may have had a chance to read that. It's at page 21. I am going to highlight one section of it for you, which is on page 22. It's an interaction between the chairperson, who is Mr. O'Toole, and a DFI official. And halfway down, the DFI official says, "We went out to all departments and said, we're developing a financial provisions bill. Are there any legislative matters you require to be covered in it?" DFI made an approach. There was a policy choice to look at introducing smart pass fees, which gave it, DFI, an opportunity to come to say, look, we feel the financial provisions bill is useful and timely vehicle to bring in the legislation we need. And then further on down, Matthew says, "I am interested in whether it was made explicit to people that it included such things as the provision to introduce smart pass charges," which is what we're debating. "That has not been discussed in a policy sense. It is a theoretical subject that occasionally comes up in respect of fiscal sustainability, but I'm not aware of it being the policy intent of any minister." And then Mr. Neeson in reply says, "The bill gives DFI the ability to introduce fees at some point in the future should it decide to do so." So members may have views on this. Last week I suggested this provision is subject to, at the minute, negative resolution. We have been asked to provide, that is the DFI committee, have been asked to provide a view on that. I think given the fact that it could introduce charges for people, if DFI so wish, for smart passes, my view last week, and it remains the same, is that it should be subject to affirmative resolution, but I am open to the committee's view on that. Harry.
Oh, Chair, I would totally agree with you. At least then it would have to, any changes would have to run through the House, so it would make better sense, I would say. So, yeah, and it's simple fix. Yeah.
John?
Yes, Chair, don't want to speak too much on it, but absolutely, it's an important issue that I think needs to be discussed. Should it become forward, should be discussed on the floor, and that we should have a say and an ability to scrutinise that. So I would support that.
Okay. I take other views on that. If anyone has any.
Certainly no other dissenting views, Chair. So
Okay. Okay. Well then, if committee are intent, Michael, we write back and say it is the committee's view that this should be affirmative resolution. Okay. That's fine. Do members have any other matters they want to raise from the previous meeting? Everyone content? Okay. Takes us on to core at page 35. You'll see the core memo, which Clark has provided for us, and there's not much. Sometimes we have oodles, but not today. The only thing, just in terms of stuff that's worth highlighting, at page 39, there's correspondence from Gravis Planning regarding the consultation on the draft master plan for Belfast Harbour. For the next 25 years. What a big master plan that must be. There are drop-in events should members wish to attend regarding that, and I just need your agreement to note any other core on that. Members agreed? Okay. And that takes us on to the first of our oral evidence sessions this morning, and this is from Northern Ireland Water. The briefing can be found at page 45, and we are hearing this morning from Dr. Sara Venning, Dr. Gary Curran, and Ronan Larkin. And I'll let the witnesses get seated.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. With so many doctors, if anyone falls ill, we should be okay. Can I ask for committee agreement that this evidence session is recorded by Hansard?
Agreed.
Okay. And as the members get settled, you've been here before, I would invite you to make a opening statement of up to 10 minutes. And then, of course, you will expect some of our committee members to ask you questions following that. And really, the committee is in your hands.
Excellent.
Sarah, you probably lead us off.
Thank you very much. So thanks for inviting us to provide this update to the committee on NI Water with a focus on the impact of constrained budget for PC21 and beyond. So we have provided to the committee a supporting paper which sets out the operational and financial realities that are faced and indeed the challenges with connecting new properties to the public wastewater system. Next spring, our PC28 business plan will set out the capital investments needed to meet the programme for government priorities and the statutory obligations we are required to deliver against. The reality is pretty stark. So even the minimum plan for PC28, and that's the period between 2028 and 2033, will require nearly double the level of today's capital investment. And only with those kind of levels can we begin to reverse the years of underinvestment. And I think it's worth bearing in mind that this level of funding, this significantly increased funding, is what our peers across the UK and the Republic of Ireland are already starting to invest. Now, I know in this room we all recognise the pressure on public finances here in Northern Ireland, and the work that you as a committee are doing now will provide some of the clarity that without proper investment in the publicly owned water and wastewater infrastructure, Northern Ireland risks insufficient drinking water during hotter, drier periods and a continued stop on applications for wastewater connections for housing and for economic growth. The wastewater system in Northern Ireland will continue to pollute because when existing connections exceed the capacity of the network, pollution is inevitable because we can't stop receiving their wastewater. I hope that the paper has outlined how our responsibility in NI Water goes beyond the provision of day-to-day services. We're central to delivering 3 programme for government priorities: more housing, a growing economy and an improved environment. And they're very interconnected, and our regulatory framework reflects that. So the Utility Regulator's 2021 settlement set out what was needed to enable growth and to protect the environment. Now, funding hasn't matched their analysis or the scale of the challenge that's ahead of all of us. Across the 6-year price control, we estimate that NI Water will be underfunded by some £470 million against the regulator's determination for PC21. And the result of that is that a quarter of the work that was deemed essential will not happen. Around 100 towns and villages will remain constrained, unable to grow without risking further environmental damage. Now, through innovation and collaboration, we have enabled some housing development, but there has been no real progress on the structural environmental deficit. In fact, it could be said that we're going backwards. The £1.4 billion Living with Water plan for Belfast has stalled, and without it, Belfast Lough risks becoming the next Lough Neagh, except in Belfast Lough, sewage is the primary pollutant, and that's a direct result of underinvestment. NI Water aspires to the day when we no longer need legal protection from prosecution for pollution incidents, but aspiration alone isn't enough. Only investment and collective action will fix this. We will continue to innovate and stretch the ageing assets that we run, but that isn't a solution to systemic issues like Belfast Lough and the ageing infrastructure. The programme for government doesn't take a siloed approach, and neither can we. Housing, the environment and the economy need to advance together. Our submission for next spring will set out what is needed for capital investment and for day-to-day operations. So this year's operating budget for day-to-day operations is some £18 million below what the regulator deemed an efficient company would need to provide the services we provide. Northern Ireland is on a knife edge, and how water and wastewater services are provided each day. Last year was just about manageable from us because the weather was benign and because rainfall was low, particularly through the autumn and winter. If conditions turn against us this year, we face some risk in relation to our operating costs. As a public body, NI Water takes its responsibilities seriously to deliver services efficiently and to be transparent about the challenges ahead. And we hope we've done that this morning and will continue to do so. So we're happy to pause now and pick up on any questions that the committee might have.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for your presentation this morning. I'll kick off if that's okay. It's not in the stuff that we had here, but it was in the last briefing we got. I read through your annual report, and I'll quote something that your chair, Jo Ashton, said in her sort of introduction regarding that. And it struck me at the time. I'd never read these lines coming from a chair before, but as a result, the board has concluded that material uncertainties exist which cast significant doubt over our future as a going concern. The financial statements are prepared on the going concern basis and would not include any adjustments that would be necessary if this basis were inappropriate. It's really that first line that your chair said there. The board has concluded that material uncertainties exist which cast doubt over our future as a going concern. Would you concur with the chair? Is that how serious this is?
It is, and that has also been externally validated by the external auditors who review the accounts after they are prepared. So that material uncertainty is as a result of the fact that the funding, the budget that is allocated to NI Water in terms of RDL for its operating costs and CDL for its capital investment programme fall short of what has been allowed for within the regulatory settlement, and because we are being held to account to deliver a regulatory settlement for which we do not have sufficient money to do. So there are a series of outputs, deliverables, investments that are included within PC21 that we now know we won't be able to deliver, but yet we have a regulatory contract, if you like, with the utility regulator that says we will do that. So that does create a material uncertainty.
It moves building on the point, Chair, because Northern Ireland Water is both a government-owned company and a publicly owned entity, it's also a Companies Act company, and so the standards to which we have to report are against the Companies Act and the various financial reporting council standards and so on. So that opinion, and then how that's echoed by the independent auditors report by KPMG, they've set that out in their opinion as well.
Just picking up on that, you're an NDPP,
Yes.
NDPB.
Yes.
Yeah. As such, in terms of your spend, is that counted against DFI accounts? Forgive me, I should know the answer to that.
We get consolidated up. Our spend gets consolidated up into the broader.
Which I would imagine is a bit of an issue as well.
It can be, and you have the different reporting requirements, and the one for the board in the annual report and accounts is we go through an external audit by an independent auditor, KPMG in our case, and they look at the reporting and they look at the various factors that would test how they would then set about an opinion, and their opinion is mirrored in the chair statement.
I'm going to ask you your view. The Minister's three-pronged approach is talked at length in this committee. The Minister on the 11th of February in a press release from the department said Kimmins outlines plans to tackle wastewater infrastructure. Now, in the second line, she blames the British government for underinvestment. That's not unusual in this place. However, in the second paragraph, she states funding, innovative thinking and working in partnership will hold the key to tackling this issue. So funding, innovative thinking and working in partnership will hold the key to tackling this issue. What's your view on the Minister's three-pronged approach?
I think in the first instance, funding, innovative thinking and working in a partnership are excellent endeavours, and they will absolutely hold the key to solving the issues here. And then in terms of the three-pronged approach, which really is looking at funding, looking at sustainable drainage and looking at developer contributions, again, all three things will help. I think what's increasingly clear from the material that we're sharing with you, funding is the most significant of those three prongs that will enable us to make significant advances in the ambitions of the programme for government for housing and environmental betterment and economic growth.
And how is prong one going with Northern Ireland Water?
In relation to funding?
Yep.
So at the minute, we remain underfunded to the utility regulator's final determination, and certainly for the remainder of this price control, we don't have any line of sight of increases in that funding. We are starting our work on the next price control, as I have outlined. We call that PC28, and we will be talking to lots of people now, explaining what you can expect from that price control and the price tag associated with it. So I do think that there is more progress to be made in relation to the funding.
Say, if you allow me to stay with funding for a second, if you were Mystic Meg and looking at In particular, the interest for you, I would imagine, will be capital at an executive level, and as you look towards PC28, and you'll have a fair, I would imagine, understanding of the sort of capital pressures that exist at an executive level. How confident are you that the department will be able to deliver the capital that will enable you to provide us with clean drinking water, rivers that aren't polluted, that sort of thing?
Yeah.
So really it's that connection, Sarah, between your read of the funding package that you're currently getting as you look into PC28 and the capital pressures that exist at an executive level. How confident are you you're going to get the capital that you require from the Minister to deliver what you want to deliver?
I think just to say, a great question, and at the outset, it's not just capital. So everyday running costs are as significant a challenge for us, and I suppose as we sit here right now, are a real challenge, because if you don't have enough running costs, you start to introduce all sorts of risk into your business, your running costs are as simple as, just like in all our houses, the ability to pay your electricity bill, the ability to pay your rates, and these are inescapable. So we are a large organisation. We have closed an efficiency gap to within 5% of the most efficient company, and the most efficient company is a notional and made-up company. So we've done very well. Northern Ireland has done very well for a publicly owned utility to have done that. Ordell and operating costs is a big concern for us. And in terms of capital, I think as we look forward, what we're seeing is, yes, and absolutely, you need to double the amount of capital that you're investing in your water and wastewater infrastructure in order that you can assure the public that there is sufficiency of clean, safe drinking water, that the drinking water is clean and safe, and that the wastewater can be treated and returned to the environment in a way that isn't detrimental to the environment. What we have looked at, and is very much aligned to other water companies, that the scale of investment that is required is such that these levels of investment will need to continue for 10 to 15 years. So this is a very large endeavour that needs to be taken on. I think in terms of, you'd asked the department's ability to fund that, I think it's much bigger than the department. This is a matter for the Assembly, for the wider executive to look at those plans and to say, how does that fit with our programme for government, and how do we wish to prioritise this? What we can do is to set out the cost, and we can set out what you get for your money, and you can take an assurance that that is all tested to make sure it is as efficient and provides as much value for money as possible. And then really we are publicly owned, and I think it is a matter for a wider executive to decide what, how they wish to allocate their money. But we do hear the mood music around constrained capital. What we can't do is make it cheaper to run a water and wastewater company. This is the price of owning a water and wastewater company.
Okay. I've got several other questions, but I'll take one more because I'm conscious that other committee members come in and are waiting patiently. It's really informational for me. It's on the information you provided to us. For members, it's on page 57. For you guys, it's called locations. And it's the fifth paragraph down, and it's really just to understand the thinking behind this. So I'll read it out to you there. We recognise these locations may not always be a developer's first choice, but they offer practical alternatives and a quicker route to securing wastewater connections. It was just for me to understand what that means. I wasn't quite sure from reading it through what you were talking about in that particular paragraph.
Yeah, Gary will take that.
That's really to do with the interaction that we have between our developers and our developer services team. So there's been a lot of really good work to identify where capacity does exist. So the opportunity arises that maybe there is an alternative from wanting to connect in an area of constraint to an area where there is capacity, and that has been quite beneficial in changing some of the opportunities that we've had. So previous years we knew of about 37,000 potential applications, and that was split about 50-50 in terms of what could be connected and not connected. This year we believe that's in the order of 55,000, and that split has moved into about 2/3 where potentially connections could be made, and part of that is the ability to look at areas where there is opportunity at the minute without the need for further investment.
And so, Gary, just to be clear on that point, I think what you're saying is that a developer wants to come along and build some houses, in Massey Avenue, but you might go back to them and say, well, you can't really, there's no connections in Massey Avenue. Would you think about the Belmont Road and put them there instead? Yes. Is that a fair summary of what you're saying?
But on a much broader scale, they look at catchments and they, as opposed to individual roads. But yes, and the principle is the same. That they
And it's more working with the developers in that they might say, I have land in place A, and we would say, well, there's no capacity in place A, and they might say, well, I have land in place B. Will you have capacity? We have capacity in place B, so you might want to progress that scheme first. And if we were in the place where we had a funded investment programme, the theory being by the time you finish place B, we might have the investment done in place A and you can move on to there. And that was the approach that we were designing to take with developers to try and keep their work programmes running.
Fine. So, but that it sounds like it's quite expansive. So actually, that place A could be in Ards and North Down, and place B actually could be in Belfast or Mid Ulster. Is that right?
Yeah.
could be.
Yeah.
Okay, so right, okay, that's fine. Look, I have more, but I don't want to hold up other colleagues on the committee. So, John, it's over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, folks, for coming along again. I think this is maybe the 7th or 8th time you've been in the front of the committee this mandate, so we thank you for continuing to come forward, and you're always as forthright as we'd expect you to be. And sadly for me, this is probably the starkest that we have heard. It reflects the too tragic reality of the underinvestment that Northern Ireland Water has faced and the crisis, Sarah, that you have outlined. When you say things like delivering fresh drinking water could be at risk, and that we're looking at the next Lough Neagh and Belfast Lough due to the lack of waste capacity, these are absolutely tragic statements and a sad indictment on the situation that we currently face. Can you just set out, in terms of first of all, the waste capacity issue and the risk to Lough Neagh, because I want to hear more about that, how much raw sewage is currently being pumped into Lough Neagh as a result of the lack of capacity due to underfunding, and how much will that likely increase in the years ahead if we don't see any of the investment that's required?
Okay, well, I'll pass over to Gary. I would just preface this by saying that in actual fact, our challenge for Lough Neagh is probably more one of drinking water and the ability to treat the drinking water and to remove any taste and odour associated with the water in its current state than it is one of having to make interventions on the wastewater network, because the nutrients that are causing the problems in Lough Neagh are not, for the most part, coming from NI Water assets. But I'll let Gary.
I said Lough Neagh, I meant Belfast Lough, sorry.
Oh,
Belfast Lough around Belfast. Yeah, Belfast Lough would be the next Lough Neagh, but how much is being pumped into Belfast Lough currently? Yes. And how much is that set to increase given the lack of capacity issues?
Okay, so Gary, do you feel comfortable picking that?
Specifically for Belfast Lough, I don't have a figure at the moment, but generally what we have is a lot of really detailed modelling that will estimate the figures that will go in, because we don't have monitors on all the locations. Overall, depending on the weather, we treat about 102 million cubic metres of water per year, and the vast majority of that is treated in a good manner and returned to the loch as per the standards. In Belfast Lough, the issue there is predominantly due to water overflowing from our networks, and that's what we were looking through the Living with Water programme in Belfast to start to address. and as you know, that has now been paused. So the issue in Belfast is more to do with the networks. At the moment, our works are adhering to the standards that are currently laid out for it, for those works. But if we want to expand, and if the standards that are imposed upon us are tightened, then there will need to be significantly more investment in our wastewater treatment works in Belfast Lough.
So I know we didn't really properly answer your question there. I do think that, and there is better. So I'd probably reference you to on our website the story of Belfast Lough. So that's a publicly available document, and I think you'll find most of the
You get that in the record.
the facts and figures that you seek in that document. And I think that document does set out that the majority of the pollution in Belfast Lough is as a result of wastewater assets. So we understand that, and we have plans that we would have invested in and increased the capacity of Belfast wastewater treatment work by 2027. That won't happen. We would have done work in Sydenham pumping station, again substantially started by 2027. That won't happen. We would have been working in Kinniger wastewater treatment works in this price control. That's not happening. Now, what we are doing in those areas to make the most of the money that we have been allocated, and I do appreciate that, you know, £350 million of capital is a lot of money. We are doing base maintenance, so we are maintaining those assets to try and hold their condition as it currently is. But we are not getting any growth or additional capacity in that, and that doesn't allow us to deal with new standards that are coming in. So I think that Belfast Lough is a significant issue, and again, I don't have the specific figures for Belfast housing at this point in time in terms of what housing is held up as a result of the Living with Water programme being paused or stalled.
3,200 according to the...
Yeah, about 3,200, yeah. And the issue is the opportunities for doing anything in Belfast are very, very limited. The only opportunity potentially is like for like, so if you have a building and that's demolished, so a brownfield site or something like that, that is really the only opportunity in the Greater Belfast area.
Okay, well, to summarise what you've said, and I think you've been very helpful, and we'll refer people to that document as well, is that Belfast Lough, on the current trajectory, could be the next Lough Neagh, an environmental crisis created solely by the lack of investment in our wastewater capacity that will get worse year on year until something is done about it. That is an undeniable reality, and it will get worse until that investment is there. And I firmly agree with you, Dr. Venning, that this is an executive priority. The buck currently sits with the Minister for Infrastructure. I don't think enough is being done to identify the problem, but the entire programme for government is predicated upon our need for wastewater capacity. We cannot build schools, houses, economic opportunities, new health facilities unless the capacity there, and people need to get real about that. And I know that you accept that, you know, so I'm preaching to the choir in that respect. Just a couple of points to move on then to the current funding capital gap in PC21 is to increase from 11% to 18%. That's my understanding from your presentation.
Yes.
And a number of the schemes that are affected by that are particularly the Belfast Living with Water. I think you set out a couple more. Were they specific parts of that aspect, and what else is due to be impacted? And a third aspect of the question is, I know you said that the assets are being maintained as best as possible, but they are ageing.
Yes.
So what stage are we running to stand still maintaining them? And underinvestment is increasing costs over time, if that makes sense.
Yes. So the gap in PC21, the larger schemes are the Living with Water schemes, but across Northern Ireland, all parts of Northern Ireland are affected, and it is the wastewater enhancement for the most part that is curtailed. Some water mains refurbishment has also been curtailed as part of the measures to live within the allocation. So it isn't solely Belfast. And then you had asked, so what we have done is we have pivoted to say, with the capital that we have, how can we make it targeted investment? And some of the targeted investment that we have been able to make has enabled new connections to the wastewater network. So we have done that specifically with the money that the Minister has allocated for those purposes. And then you went on to say that that this underfunding just leads to the need for even more investment. And I think that's the point to make, that having the Living with Water programme, if you take it just because it's one distinct programme, came under some scrutiny because we went through a period of inflation and costs went up, and the overall cost of that programme went up. A review was carried out and a decision reached that the programme would not be funded any further. Those costs are only going up. So the pausing of this programme for 3 to 5 years, as has currently happened, just means that if it restarts in 2028, everything is more expensive. Nothing will have gotten cheaper. And we will have invested capital in those 5 years as well. So I think it is imperative that we, in order to recognise the programme for government, we have to find a way to kickstart this programme of investment.
Final point, Chair, if I may, I could ask about 50 questions because it is a massive topic, but I'm conscious of time. There are currently 19,000-ish properties currently being held by lack of capacity, 18,000 plus homes, over 200 commercial properties, and it could take up to £5 billion over a considerable period of time to make the network big enough to even expand to that. How do you go about triaging the geographical areas and the capacity the wastewater capacity centres in order to expand the network, given that it can't all be done at once? Has a programme of work been undertaken to look at what could be done and in what order, and how long would that realistically take to bring the capacity up should the money be handed to you tomorrow?
Gary, do you want to take that?
So in terms of triaging, specifically for the applications, we look at that and we do a lot of work with the developers coming in to see what can and can't be done. In terms of the investment across the province, that is in the price control period, and we will look at all of our assets in a standard format to see what investment is required and when that can be done. And certainly the next period will require significant investment right across all of the province, with a focus particularly on Belfast Lough. And one of the consequences you talked about in terms of the lack of investment is a knock-on effect on our maintenance costs. So actually, if you don't keep investing in your assets and improving those, your maintenance costs will increase and start using up even more capital.
And we know that the cost of doing business and the cost of delivering infrastructure project is increasing on average up to 10% a year. So that without that investment, that 5 billion could be 5.5 billion by next year and 6 billion potentially by the year after. And is that so? When was that 5 billion assessed as being the amount needed to do the infrastructure works? And how much could that be if it's not delivered imminently to start the works? If that makes sense, given the costs are increasing year on year.
So that's the work we're doing at the minute.
Okay,
and the estimates we have at this moment in time for the standards that we know about at this moment in time.
Okay.
The regulated price control, Deputy Chair, that we did for PC21, the current price control room, that evaluated all that investment need down almost by scheme, and then that was examined around what inflation indices should be used, and we take it from the OBR stats and so on. So we don't go off and make our own; we take one from there.
Yes.
And so that was given pre and post inflation, and that set out a good base for what that cost should look like.
Okay.
And then that again is independently assessed by the utility regulator. And I know you've had the utility regulator back up here at the committee at one point. And they, on a number of occasions since then, have endorsed the PC21 capital programme and said there's nothing in it that is surplus to requirements. These things need done for Northern Ireland, and they have independently assessed that plan and determined these are the schemes that have to be done. So there's a really good bedrock of assessment, independent scrutiny and so on to allow those schemes to go forward. As Sarah was saying, a lot of them are currently
And
stalled.
to address your point around how do you pick, so the starter for 10 is always the social and environmental guidance. So that is the wider executives document that sets out these are the priorities that we as an executive set. So that provides the framework for any of us to say, okay, what needs to be done, and then NI Water work with the Environment, the Northern Ireland Environment Agency, the Drinking Water Inspectorate, the Consumer Council and the Department and the regulator, and say, so based on our statutory obligations and the levels of service that we need to deliver, here is all the things that we think need to be done. And then we take cognizance of the priorities in the social and environmental guidance, and in working groups, that's how the things at the top of the list get prioritised, and it has to be affordable. So when you take into account, that's why it will take 10 to 15 years to address all this, because well, Northern Ireland couldn't withstand the road disruption or the disruption. There wouldn't be enough contractors to do all the work in a 5-year period, and so you do programme this work. But the assurance I just want to give everyone is that the agencies, in terms of the Environment Agency, the Drinking Water Inspectorate, the Consumer Council and indeed the Department, all have a say in how schemes get prioritised into a price control.
Thank you very much for your time. Maybe come back afterwards, but appreciate it.
Thank you, John. Sarah, I just want to pick up on that last point you made, which leads on from the previous question that John asked. And again, Northern Ireland Water were provided through with £30 million of funding through October 24 and June 25 monitoring rounds. This enabled you to connect 5,000 properties of the 19,000 you needed to. Just to be clear, in the provision of that £30 million, was there any suggestion from DFI as to where that money should be used?
No, DFI were keen that we would use the money to facilitate connections to the wastewater network, and the determining factor in reality and the truth was the schemes that were progressed. So in other words, we had a PC21 plan, we had a plan to deliver all our work over 6 years. We were at the start of that plan, so the schemes in reality that had gone through the planning process, we knew what needed to be done, we maybe had contracts to get the work done, they were at the top of the queue, and the money was becoming available. It's monitoring round money, so really it was becoming available with months to invest, so it was the schemes that were ready to deliver were the schemes that fell into that, so there was no preference or direction given in terms of geography. There was a preference and direction given in terms of we would like this money to be invested to support connections to the wastewater network.
That's great. Thank you very much. Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, folks. Good to see you all again. Just picking up on the brief point there around the monitoring round, we're hopeful that there is one coming soonish, hopefully. Just keen to hear about any engagement, at ministerial level and so on, around this upcoming monitoring round, and is there any hope of yourselves getting
I think, as the Chair had said, the Minister has been always very supportive and recognising of the fact that additional investment is required in water and wastewater. So she has been supportive, and she and her officials have asked us what our need is. We initially would have made a bid and said that in any monitoring round we thought that we could usefully invest possibly between 10 and 20 million, just bearing in mind the length of time you have left to deliver. But we find ourselves now, essentially in December, so we have revised that to 10 million because the time for a £20 million investment has now passed. It's not that the need isn't there, but the ability to deliver within the time frame has. So yes, the Minister has been supportive and has asked what it is that we can do, and we have provided figures.
And for the much needed, if we just add to that, for the much needed Resourcedale operating costs to run the business each day, we put a bid in alongside that 10 million from capital. We put in a £5 million Resourcedale bid alongside that, Stephen.
Okay, no problem. Just in terms of the Belfast Lock, obviously the reports this week have brought it again to people's attention. It is causing significant concern right across the country and indeed locally as well within my own constituency. The Living with Water programme, we talked about that last week with the senior officials as well within DFI that were up. the Kinniger upgrade. I know you're well aware of that, Sarah, too, over the years. Given the financial situation today and what you've seen over the last number of years, in the direction of travel, which is a pretty gloomy picture, is a major work being done in terms of separating those plans out, and doing what you can, when you can? Is that still the plan?
Well, we do, as I say, we're doing the basic maintenance, and that, I suppose, constitutes what you can, where you can, but that doesn't address the environmental need of those works. And the what we have done is we have taken the likes of Kinniger, Belfast, and I think Whitehouse to outline business case. So we are able to say, this is the design, this is the amount of money that is required, this is how this would be done. But what you can't do with a scheme that costs in excess of, let's say, £100 million is say I can do 5 million in this 6 months and then wait another 18 to 24 months and spend another 5 million and then wait. Once you start, you are committed, and the difficulty that people are having at the minute is nobody can give us the nod to say start. Because they are so large, but they are, I would say, inescapable investments, and we are going to have to find a way to make the start.
Yeah,
there is strong evidence that says when you take I'm going to call it, if it's the wrong answer, forgive me, a stop-start approach, it inevitably becomes much more expensive to deliver.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that totally. Just turning then to page 12 of your briefing, it's a number of the 11 council areas, and in terms of the units unable to connect currently, and my own local council area, Ards North Down, is 3,350 units unable to connect. In 2 paragraphs above that table, it talks about some areas being unsuitable for the developer-led solutions, which I know earlier in the year you confirmed that it's not the silver bullet, the developer-led solutions, and I think it's one of the very few things that the Minister is coming forward with, and I think that is a cause for concern. So could you maybe just clarify that from within that table, is that correct, that those are not suitable for developer-led solutions? Is that correct?
No.
The figure for Ards is skewed by one particularly large development. In the Ards North Down area, it's skewed by one particularly large development that needs significant capital investment. It's not something that a developer, the scale of it, could undertake. There are elements within it where the developer can help reduce the unwanted water there, but it's something that we are working on, and sort of lining up with your last question, that if subsequent money became available, we're working to have that ready that we could address, but the majority of that number is skewed by one large development. And
it talks about a further 6 areas. I presume that number will keep on growing. Can you give any more detail on those 6 areas at this stage, or?
In terms of the overall numbers there, so
just on that last line you just mentioned,
it's 23 times, and then it'll increase.
And I mean, it is, as we get more information, that will expand out right across Northern Ireland. So it's generally just as we get better information and we understand what is happening in our network, then that the constraints will become clear.
Just final point, in July in the summer, the Minister announced an innovative wastewater approach unlocking economic growth in Uri, which just happens to be in the Minister's constituency, and it led to 400 new properties being connected. Can that be replicated across the country, or is that a unique solution to that area? I'm just trying
I don't mind taking this in the first instance, and then I'll hand over to Gary, because Gary did the most of, or initiated this. So this is a pilot. As it became apparent to NI Water that capital was becoming a problem, and actually as we looked across the water and we could see just the scale of investment in wastewater and the scale of work that people are going to need to do to deal with climate, it isn't affordable to continue to build wastewater solutions in the way that we have always done it, which involves the pouring of lots and lots of concrete. So we started to say to ourselves, how could you look at things differently? And Newry was a catchment that had a wastewater treatment works in it, that the cost of remediating was getting more and more and more expensive. So within NI Water, we realised we were not going to be able within PC21 to progress the Newry scheme. So we thought that this was an excellent catchment to start to look at a new and innovative approach, because it had a wastewater treatment works that needed increase in capacity. It had industrial trade in the area, which was using a lot of capacity, and it had a significant network and difficulties within that network. So when we started to look at this, it was probably 24 months ago, and the current minister was not the minister. So the Newry piece and the fact that our minister now is from that area is completely unrelated. And what we were doing is taking a different approach to assessing wastewater improvements by looking at it, the entire catchment. And it's very, very much a pilot. And we have been able to take that forward, and we think we're going to get some very good results from it. And to your question, could it work in other places? So what we have done with the limited money that we have is we're starting to look at other areas to see if this approach can be replicated. It cannot solve the very large investment problem that we need, but what it potentially can do in some instances is give people 5 years.
And sort of in layman's terms, I suppose, from non-engineering background, what does that look like, or what's the difference in this approach that works?
So so it's looking at, instead of saying there's a works and it's out of capacity, fix the works, it's saying what feeds into the works. Oh, a whole catchment feeds into the works. What's in that catchment? So let's be innovative. Let's get sensors that didn't exist in the past, put them in the sewers. Let's take the signals back from those sensors and take them to a computer. Let's analyse them. What does that tell us? So in some instances, what it's telling us is there is unwanted water getting into your sewer, so groundwater. So when you see that, you say, well, how can I stop that and create capacity? And then also working with traders in the area to understand, well, how much of the capacity of the works is taken up by treating the trade effluent, and what contribution could those traders potentially do to remove load. And through the combination of preventing unwanted water, understanding more about what's going into your network, working in partnership and collaboration with your traders, can you create, and then looking at your works and saying, how can I optimise the process? How can I invest in the existing assets to create to make it more efficient and potentially create capacity? The combination of all those things, the sum of the parts is maybe greater than the whole, meant that you are able to open a closed catchment, and that's what has happened in that area. And that's what it won't work everywhere, because there mightn't be unwanted water getting in, there mightn't be a trader, but it might work in some places. And so, we feel that we should try to replicate that, and that's we've been talking to the Transformation Fund about this, because we do think it's a truly innovative piece of work.
Okay, thank you, folks.
Sure, I won't comment on the Newry because I live in the area, so I'll let my comment on that.
All right, thanks, David. Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for coming in, albeit given the news that you're having to give this again, unfortunately. Again, turning back to Belfast Lock and where we find ourselves. I mean, I suppose, can you articulate maybe perhaps the frustration, given we referenced your own piece of work. This was 2 years ago that this was talked about. This was 2 years ago that we were approaching business critical for that, and it is just coming to pass. I mean, as the directors, whatever, of this operation, I mean, how frustrating is that?
I mean, and for the staff in NI Water who work tirelessly day in and day out to make the most of the wastewater networks, I think it is incredibly difficult for those people who see assets ageing and who know investment is required and they're not receiving investment. It is difficult. I would say that in relation to Belfast Lock and Living with Water, this process started in 2010. Now, for very large infrastructure schemes, that is the process. It does take a very long time, but in 2010 there was a recognition that this was such a large programme of work that a holistic approach was needed, so that we should involve the Rivers Agency, the local council, the Department for Infrastructure to come up with an integrated plan, and that's what Living with Water was. So the Living with Water programme was an innovative approach to dealing with drainage in a city. It has been adopted across the UK, and the frustrating part is that other cities across the UK have gone ahead and implemented these approaches, whereas we continue to talk about it.
Thank you. But it is quite startling, I think, and again, given the gravity of what we're about to see or what we are seeing in Belfast Lough. Just, I think you referenced there, doubling today's investment in order to meet a minimum plan, I think is what you referenced, in the introduction, and then going back to the actual report as well. Current cost-saving measures are eroding resilience and building increasingly unacceptable levels of risk into the business. The evidence states we will propose policy changes and service interruptions that could be instructed by DFI if required. I suppose really, what service interruptions and what policy changes to service will NI Water be proposing to DFI, and how would you expect that to be carried out, and what would be the trigger point in order to say you need to instigate this?
So what you're referring to there is operating costs, and it's operating costs in the current year, and there's been some discussion, I think, at the committee in the past in relation to that. So for this financial year, as opposed to taking on board the learnings from last year, NI Water put forward a budget for operating costs based on a best case scenario. So a best case weather scenario, and if you recall, you probably had presentations from the department that said actually that's how they would propose we should do things. So we have put forward that best case scenario, and all of the paper calls out is that in the event that the best case weather scenario does not materialise, there is risk in the numbers, and so then that risk will have to be treated, it will have to be dealt with, and it can be dealt with in a number of ways. So the best way for customers and for citizens is probably that the additional funding is found if it is required, and at this point in time I'm not saying that it is required. All that we are signalling is that there is a risk inherent in the forecast. And the department have again said that should a risk materialise through a severe weather event, that they would bid for the funding to meet that risk. So one way to deal with it is to find the funding, and then another way, if funding was not available and you found yourself in a scenario where you had a shortfall of X amount of pounds, well then that's where the conversation would have to be. And invariably when we look at this, and we've spoken in the past, really our main controllable cost is power, and having to then identify what we would not operate, and in not operating something there's a knock-on service impact. So it's that kind of thing, but it's in relation to operating costs, and really all that we're signalling is inherent in the current budget. There is more risk in this year than there would have been in other years.
And the risk currently sits with, as we head into the winter period, and we've seen some interesting weather patterns recently. There is winter weather risk that, in order to make the number currently, we're likely to need another very benign winter weather, such as we had last year. I couldn't guess what that weather would look like as we go forward the next 4 or 5 months. You probably couldn't either. So you're in the kind of lap of the gods a little bit with that. And that probably doesn't give you the best way to operate, a critical service like a wastewater company. So we had always done some very good analysis and historic analysis of the cost base and the power loads and that kind of thing. And we wouldn't have called that a worst case scenario. We would have called that a kind of a real world scenario. And I think there was this discussion around, well, if you looked at a best case scenario, what impact would that have on your forecast positively? But then you sit with that risk, and that risk sits somewhere. And of course, there's been discussion around whether that risk could then sit with the department, and they might find a way of dealing with that risk.
Thank you. A couple more points. You've mentioned a couple of times now, and I think you're quite right, regarding it being sort of an executive decision, I think, and obviously that sits with the minister, but then a sort of holistic nearly view. The former infrastructure minister, now Minister of Finance, when you say what are you doing, he sort of throws out 500 million, was given to you guys. I mean, where do you think this is go? I mean, where does this need to go? Because it always just seems to be that there's this sort of there's not a correlation between, well, we're giving NI Water X amount of money. You guys come in and say, well, actually, we're very efficient, and that's stated, well stated. But we're not even running the standstill. We're standing still on the point of going backwards. And again, I can't really get my head around this, if that makes sense.
I think in the first instance the numbers are very big.
Yeah.
So of course the finance minister will say NI Water gets 500 million. That's a lot of money, and absolutely it is a lot of money. I think there is absolutely a neat solution, and the neat solution is, you own a regulated water company. It goes through a process with a regulator in the same way as there is a regulated electricity company in Northern Ireland. It goes through a process with the regulator. The regulator sets out, this is the programme, these are the operating costs, these are the capital costs. The company can set out, and this is what you get for that investment. So as I start to look into the next price control, this is what you get for your investment. You get the infrastructure that enables houses to connect. You get the ability to build X social houses. You get the ability to drive forward your economy. And importantly, you get a programme that can deliver environmental betterment. So holistically, that's what we get for that. This is how much it costs. It's a package. It's a 5-year package. That's what needs to be analysed, and the executive have decided that it's publicly owned and it's funded from public funds. So if there is a package of work, it's a 5-year package of work. It needs funded from the outset, and there shouldn't be any annual debate about how much do I get and should I bid in a monitoring round. It should be done on a certainty of a 5-year programme of work, because in that way we would be dealing with our capital teams and saying, I have certainty of this programme of work. You're going to start in Belfast, you're going to be working there for 3 years. After Belfast you're going to North Down, you're going to be working there for 2 years. Buy your diggers because it's cheaper. You have it keeps people here. So some of our supply chain are working in ROI and they're working in the UK, but they could be working here. They'd probably prefer to be working here if they had certainty of work. So I think that's the neat way. If the executive want the outcomes that come with the package of work, and if they don't, then they can say, well, actually, I don't want those 4 things. And again, the package of work can be cheaper, and we will get on and deliver the package of work. And that would be the most efficient way. And we can be absolutely held accountable for delivery against budget, and all the extras that we can deliver. So the extras that we can deliver are around climate change, climate resilience, helping to support other parts of public sector by some of the infrastructure that we install. So I think there's a real win.
No, thank you, and thank you for laying that out quite clearly. Is there, and this is my final point, Chair, I promise, is there, it always seems to me sometimes that there's almost, it's not so much a fresh water, drinking water versus wastewater, but is it like that? I mean, do we need to almost disentangle those two things within the public perception? Because again, I think sometimes it's very much general public, turn the tap on, that's our water, happy days, but as is our human nature, we maybe don't want to think about the foil end of things, because it just, I mean, we talk about the social impacts, we talk about the environmental impacts, we talk about the economic impacts. It does all seem to be hinging on the wastewater end of things, but it just doesn't, but we seem to be tangling the two things up. Obviously, I mean, we don't want to say it, but do we, I mean, I've been in your big operations room and we see all those lights flashing and such, but do we, are we at a stage where we, given the revenue pressures, that we have to prioritise the fresh water? Because it simply is, we must keep the taps running the same way we must keep the lights on over the wastewater, or what's the take on that?
Well, I think up until now, fresh water has been prioritised, and your drinking water is clean and safe and tested thoroughly to ensure that it remains so. And the capital funding, when it has been reduced, the impact, the brunt of that has been borne by the wastewater enhancement programmes. Part of what we're trying to signal now is that the levels of investment going forward, even in our clean water, would mean that if you maintain the status quo, i.e. how much you spend today, in the early years of PC28, there wouldn't be sufficient money to invest in some of the clean water investments that would be needed to be made. And that's where I say there is a potential risk of the provision of water during hotter, drier periods. So whenever your system is stressed and you need to push more water out, if we're not investing, we'll not be able to do that, and people will start to feel the impact of this underinvestment in their drinking water supply as well as in their wastewater supply.
And that's a capacity issue, matter, and it's also just an asset resilience matter. The assets resilience to deal with high demand, because you have to be able to switch them up during a period of prolonged hot weather. If they're not resilient, you have more chance of that asset failing during a peak demand.
Okay.
Thanks, Andrew. Harry.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you all very much. If we just start out with drinking water, did you say that there's been an increase in this past few years, say, in the usage of drinking water?
Yeah, I think our demand for drinking water now is sort of in around the 605 million litres of drinking water per day. So that's what we treat and put into distribution every single day. In the past, and certainly when I would have started in NI Water, that would have been below 600 million litres. We could have been in around the 585, 590 million litres, but consistently now we would be over 600 million litres per day. And when we get into periods of high demand, and they happen when it's hot and warm, but also when it's very, very cold, we can see that go up as high as in excess of 700 million litres of water per day that we are treating. And when we get to those levels, we are, the car's shaking. We are at stress to maintain, and it's difficult to maintain that for any sustained period of time.
Okay. I'm just thinking, is that ever divided up into per head of population? Roughly what each person
is, yes. So we would calculate our water consumption on a per capita basis, and I believe we have been running with a figure of around, I think it's 160, maybe 165 litres of water per person per day. And that would be higher than in some areas. So in some areas of the UK where they have water meters, they would be driving as low as 140 litres of water per person per day. And indeed, in thinking about areas where there is water shortages, some of those companies would be driving to say, how can they get that down to 100 litres of water per person per day?
And my question would lead on from that. Like there we've got lots of houses, businesses can't be built because of water. I can't understand how that, if we have so many people, it matters not really where those people live. If they live in your house, my house, whatever house, if it's in an area, the same amount of water goes down the same pipe literally, so there shouldn't be a block on the building of so many new houses, because the usage of water in and out is per person rather than per building. So whether you're on this part, it's the same amount of water.
Well, there's probably two things to that. There is, in the first instance, where you are is very, very important, because you could be upstream of a CSO that is polluting. So anything that you are putting into the sewer, therefore, is increasing pollution, and therefore you can't be connected. And then the second piece, that as we were doing our long-term water strategy, so we look out over 25 years and we think about population growth and how what the demand for water will be in the future. And if you think about people are tending now to have smaller families, and maybe families that don't have children, but in a 2-adult household, they're probably doing as much washing, showering, they're running the washing machine maybe every single day, they're running the dishwasher maybe every single day, maybe more often. So actually it's not per person. There is quite a significant amount of water used in a house, because people are now not living in big numbers together, but they're living in smaller numbers. So that has an impact as well.
Well, I would still argue that it's still the same amount per person, whether you're up with
I
a big
suppose
amount
I
of
think what
others.
I'm saying
Do you
is
know?
it's more. So
Yeah,
that if you
maybe
were in a
slightly,
household of 2
slightly.
people, you could they would be using more per person than a household of 6.
Yeah. Especially if, I mean, maybe a dishwasher's on and it's not full type of thing, that would create, for example. Long term and sort of higher level, would you ever think of the need to be looking at requirement of needing to dam more waters, in, like Northern Ireland, for
So
example?
the
Is that
long-term work that we had done, and I remember we had a conversation about this. It must have been the summer before the first algal bloom in Lough Neagh, and we had employed some consultants who have worked across the UK and have been advising the water companies who are in water-stressed area. And they said, well, you're very lucky in Northern Ireland because you have this big source of fresh water in the centre of Northern Ireland that is Lough Neagh, and because you have that, you don't need to be thinking about new reservoirs. So that hence the importance of respecting Lough Neagh, and also then hence the importance of when 40 to 50% of your drinking water does come from it, that our treatment processes on those plants around Lough Neagh are very robust. And we have been investing, even with this constrained capital investment, in filtration at those plants. In the past 12 months, we've invested significantly.
We've accelerated some of that investment to get better filtration.
And what about dormant dams? Are there many dams that are sort of were in use in the past and aren't being used at present?
I think we could come back to you on figures for that. We certainly have reservoirs that are not operational, but those reservoirs where they are in our ownership are looked after to the exact same standard as the ones that are operational.
Could be used again.
Well, I suppose the assurance that I'm given there is one of safety, and there's actually quite a lot of work and investment in looking after those reservoirs to make sure that they're safe and that the people who live downstream from them are safe.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Harry. Alicia.
Fáilte ófalig, you shifts shock for you. You're very welcome, and you have been here before, I'm sure often, but sorry, my kid, this is my first time here. And just again to many of the questions have already been put that I had been thinking on as you have delivered to this point. But if we just go back on the budget, 151 million against 156 million. And yet now then, you also alluded to another figure of 18 million.
Yes.
That is a drop.
Yes, so that relates to the price control. So whenever the regulator looked at, said, what do you need to provide water and wastewater services in Northern Ireland, that what they said is that we should have circa £170 million, okay, for this year, based on all the things that we have to do. But Northern Ireland is in a very constrained area for funding, and the department weren't able to meet that level of what the regulator said should be done. So we have had to drive cuts into our business in order to reduce our costs. So things like maintenance in our wastewater sites, ground maintenance, looking at any area where you can do less. And that might be not sending contractors out to do something or delaying work. And all those things were done in order to drive down those operating costs to a level that could fit within the budget that's available. So that's where that 18 million figure comes to. It's the gap between what we are getting and what the regulator has deemed an efficient water company should get to provide the level of service that they say we should be providing. And I guess what we're saying is what you're seeing now is more risk and lower levels of service.
I think you also already expressed the view earlier that you're getting good support there from the Minister in relation to sort of competing, say, for that budget as well too within the executive at the likes of it.
Yes, so the Minister has repeatedly said that she understands more investment is needed, and she makes that case. I guess as the person who's having to say no to the people who are asking for investment in their sites, I would like to see the investment. The intention is very good and her support is excellent, and we will continue to work with her. But there remains a shortfall.
Yeah. And just in relation to a question that Stephen had asked, and that was about the innovative sort of pilot scheme in Uri and so on, and whether or not it can be rolled out. Now, coming from Castleairg, which probably is the most furthest town west of the north of Ireland, that again too in our rural communities, small villages, there's an issue of capacity. And rolling out, we'll say, these new technologies and so on, is that only going to be a facility maybe that might be applied in the more urbanised areas such as the cities or the very large towns as opposed to the more rural areas in my own constituency of West Tyrone?
Well, there might be more opportunity in the larger areas to remove unwanted water if indeed it has gotten in, or there may be more traders in those rural areas that mightn't exist. But that isn't to say in the urban areas that mightn't exist in the rural areas. But that isn't to say that we're closed to innovation in any capacity. And I suppose Derg Water Treatment Works probably isn't too far away from yourselves, and we've invested significantly in that works, in filtration, to make sure that the water is clean, safe and plentiful. So it's an example of investment. I know it's not the same thing as wastewater capacity, but there is no intent on NI Water's behalf that would say, oh, just because something's in the country, we wouldn't look at it to see if we could innovate. We absolutely will. And if we take a learning from something in relation to the efficiency of pumps or how we can operate our works better, we will apply that anywhere. So.
Well, we appreciate just the development there in relation to their water treatment works, because the Derg River in itself was one that was highly polluted at one stage. But I think again to the end that in close proximity, much smaller hamlets, at the same time there's a capacity issue when it comes to building. I wonder, like, what are the strategies on the part of NI Water to ensure greater capacity? Places like Douglas Bridge, a very small hamlet, but again to one of those areas that was confronted with that problem.
So the strategy is the price control. So a price control is a holistic package of work that will look at large and small areas. And so if you have a water company and you let it work through a series of price controls, we would catch up and we would be able to facilitate development, whether that be in large urban areas or small rural areas. That is the strategy, and I think that's the goal that we should be all jointly pursuing to try and get back up on the books, because there isn't a piecemeal win for this.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And finally, Justin.
Sure, thank you, Sara, Ronan, and Gary, for your evidence. UK water companies all operate on a 5-year asset management plan. To what degree does the current reality of 1-year budgets for NA Water and 1-year planning, 1-year progress stymie your abilities to get the grips with the challenges you're facing?
Well, NI Water works to a 5-year asset management plan as well, so that's the good news. We apply the same level of rigour and standards as is seen in the UK companies. The difference being that in the price control that we're talking, so in the same way as they produce a plan of work, we produce a plan of work. A quarter of the things in our plan of work for this price control won't be delivered, and that's the impact of the underinvestment.
And probably just worth adding to that, Justin, our local regulator here, the utility regulator here, will determine our current 6-year, next to be a 5-year plan, and they will monitor and measure us against the outcomes and outputs of that plan. Regardless of what the funding is, they'll still say, did you get 3/4 of the schemes done or 100% of the schemes done? So it is that 5-year basis, and we are measured, monitored across all of the 5-year plan, all the programme.
Okay, thank you. In terms of the picture you paint, Sarah, from a funding perspective, saying that you need double the level of funding, that doesn't give us any confidence that we're going to get to grips with the challenges that are faced from a pollution perspective, and from, you mentioned that economy, environment, and housing need to advance together. They can't really advance together if the funding model is not there. And where are the solutions forthcoming on that front from the Minister, from the department, in terms of how that chasm is going to be crossed? Because it's one thing saying this is the scale of the problem, but how is it going to be solved?
Yeah, I don't know whether that's a rhetorical question. I'm not sure that I'm the person best placed to answer that. I think we're an arm's length body. We're an NDPB. We are set up to deliver, and we're set up to deliver on the executive's ambitions within the executive's funding envelope. And at the minute, we're delivering against the funding envelope that we've been given. And I guess I'm making the case in stating that it is imperative that that funding envelope is widened.
Okay.
And ring fenced.
Right. Just it doesn't give us any confidence as a committee that these things are going to actually progress, given that scale of the chasm, as I said. And you could take that as a rhetorical point if you wish. In terms of the three-pronged approach, the Minister's three-pronged approach, which prongs have the most chance of delivering success?
Well, I think all the prongs will deliver success. The one with the biggest impact will be the funding prong, and I think the Minister herself has alluded to that.
Well, the funding prong is the biggest obstacle, according to you.
Well, it's the biggest and it's the biggest opportunity.
Okay. In terms of Newry, where there was industrial trade effluent being received by your treatment plant, how innovative is it to have had a sensor in place to establish that was the case? Why is that being characterised as being innovative? Is it innovative to have, for treatment plants to have sensors to understand what's effluent is incoming?
Some of the innovations in the sensor technology enable, actually what they enable, they're able to see what's coming down a pipeline, and they're able to see the difference between domestic sewage and trade sewage, and in many respects in relation to sewage, it is innovative. These sensors and this technology didn't exist in the past. So in the past, all the operators of the works would have known is there's a lot coming to my works. My works is out of capacity, and especially in that area of unwanted water. So in the northwest, we had a pumping station that was its power costs were just getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and that was being put down to there's a lot more demand going through that pumping station. When we got the sensors and we put the sensors in, and we could see the time of day when this water was coming in, and we overlaid that with the tides, it became apparent that there was water coming in from tidal water getting into the system, and actually that was eating capacity. So that is intelligence that didn't exist in the past, and the computing power of being able to overlay lots and lots of different inputs, whether that be weather data, tidal data, pumping electricity consumption data and flow data means that you can make interventions now that you couldn't have made in the past and you wouldn't have known in the past. So actually there's been some pretty good advances in technology, and very good working with companies who are bringing innovation to the marketplace and helping them develop their innovation to such a extent that they can go ahead and sell that to other parts of the water industry.
And maybe just to expand, maybe just to expand on the sensor technology, we ran an SBRI, a Small Business Research Initiative program that opened up the opportunity for sensors, people manufacturing sensors anywhere in the world to come forward. And the successful person and their successful company, and the one we used in Newry, came from Florida. And it was the use of the technology linked to AI and the ability to record samples on a real-time basis that really was a bit of a game changer, linked to the good working relationship then that built up with that better understanding with the trade effluent customer.
Forgive me, I take my comments back. That demonstrates massive innovation, and credit to the engineers involved, credit to NA Water, credit to the Minister and the Department for exploring that and for discovering the capacity that was available based on that innovation. In terms of those trade effluents, is there a surcharge for industry who are discharging trade effluents into the system, and how the cost of treating that? How is industry charged?
So the industry, we operate a trade effluent charging regime. We will look at both the quantity of trade effluent that's coming in and the strength, and that's broken down into various areas. So there's a calculation that is done that will then charge the customer for what they put back into the system. And obviously the more pre-treatment that they can do, the lower that overall charge would be.
There is an established formula for calculating, and it's an industry-wide, UK and probably Ireland now industry-wide, but there's an established formula to be used for assessing what charges should go against different elements of a trader's effluent to produce the bill.
Okay. Again, back to funding and budgets here. You've mentioned the cost to build out the infrastructure that's necessary to facilitate development and to protect the environment as well. And there are some costs, and forgive the pun on that front. But what about the cost not to build? And has there been an audit? You talked about allying economics on this front. Has there been an audit, sir, conducted by your department or in tandem with the Department for Economy in terms of the cost to the economy of not building? No drains, no cranes. We know the well-known term now. What's the cost to the economy of not building?
Well, maybe just pick up on a couple of things, and if we can come back to the committee on trying to get some sort of a number, a numeric on that one. But the pieces of work that have been carried out, there are a number of them. Firstly, the Northern Ireland Audit Office produced a report around the funding model currently for Northern Ireland Water, and I think they touched on it on the possible societal costs of not building out the assets, and what they had recommended in that report, and it is a strong recommendation. They didn't go a huge list of recommendations, but the one key recommendation they said is that there really needs to be now a current, new, fresh, expert-led review, an independent expert-led review of the best way, the optimum way to fund Northern Ireland Water, so that those kinds of costs don't exist in our economy here locally. The other piece of work which is available to all of us and the committee here as well is the recent report produced by the Fiscal Council for Northern Ireland. And they do, in that report, they do talk to some of the possible economic fallout of not having the investment made. They also talk about not just the economic, but the societal fallout. So we see things like the holding back in the housing market and so on. And I think those are probably two pieces of strong independent work from Northern Ireland Water that we would point to for the committee to maybe examine and take a look at, because it gives some of the details in there. If it's helpful, we'll maybe take a look back through those and come back with an overview of some of that.
Absolutely, that would be very interesting and helpful indeed. Ronan, and tell me, last question is, the NA Water head of investment management, Stephen Bakewell, said this morning it was reported this morning that he would not swim in waters where there has been a discharge, speaking about Warren Point and the cold water swimmers and bathers who are brave folk. I admire their tenacity to go out on cold days and swim in the Carneyfoot Loch. But that obviously applies to places like Loch Ness, it applies to Belfast Loch. Isn't it pretty damning that a high-profile figure from NI Water is advising people in our water bodies not to swim in them?
I'll maybe just take that, and I think the detail behind what Steve said was his recommendation was not to go swimming after heavy periods of rainfall close to discharges, which would be sort of the typical evidence or advice that we would give. It's particularly after rainfall, heavy rainfall, you're likely to get discharges coming in to those areas of water. But I think we need to reflect also on the recent bathing water results that showed very positive news in terms of the standards of our bathing water around Northern Ireland, and the positive impact that the wastewater treatment is having on those designated wastewater bathing areas. There's some areas that are not designated and may not be appropriate for a range of reasons to go swimming in.
But you're right. I mean, and I think that's the whole conversation that we're having, that we should have a joined up approach whereby there is an investment programme that is applied to the wastewater network that facilitates growth, housing, economic growth and environmental betterment. And in doing that in a holistic manner, that will enable Northern Ireland over a period of time to make improvements and to step forward. And if we don't start, we are never going to get there. We should start, and we should start by funding the price controls.
Thank you, folks. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your evidence, and good luck. Travel well, folks. I don't envy your task.
Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Essentially, make a comment, and I have one more question, and it's a technical question for you. Essentially, some of the evidence today is really, and if I don't summarize this correctly, you can highlight it. Is essentially you're sort of saying, look, we have this much money, and this is what we can deliver with this envelope of money. If you want this, you need to give us more money in order to enable us to do that, and that's some of that PC21, PC28 stuff we're talking about. Is that a fair summary of where Northern Ireland Water are?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so this just a slightly technical question. Again, forgive me, I am new to this committee, and so I'm getting my head around a range of issues, including PC21s and PC28s. But I did have a look at your, it's called Price Control for Northern Ireland Water 21 to 27. It's your mid-term review final determination, which came out in September 24.
Yeah, excellent.
And the MTR, I'll just read from the abstract. The MTR process has identified that some further work is required to establish why some of NI Water's capital costs are higher than predicted, despite the lack of evidence for cost prices above inflation, i.e. real price effects. This piece of work will be undertaken and included separately outside the MTR process, and will take account of the outcome of this work as part of PC21 outturn report process. I'm just wondering, do you know where that is? Because obviously I don't know if it's been completed or not, but essentially has there been some engagement with the regulator, and where are you in that process?
I'll let Ronan answer, but I would just say I'm very pleased that you have raised that. And it's a very important piece of work to be followed up upon after the mid-term review, because it has a big impact on the amount of base maintenance that we'll be able to do going into the future. But Ronan is the link person with the regulator. So
thank you, sir. So it is a good question. Thank you for it, Chair. So PC20 was a 6-year price control, and at the beginning of that price control, the outset, it was agreed. The regulator said we will carry out a mid-term review to check out where you're up to at the midpoint, and what needs to go next. So they examined that, and the first thing they said is your cost base is going up because primarily of inflation. So if you think about post-COVID and the beginning of the Russian-Ukrainian war, inflation hit its highest point since 1948, and that fed its way all the way through the supply chain in terms of capital costs and so on. There's a good graphic on the paper, I think we submitted on page 8 of the graphic, and it clearly shows where the mid-term review, the blue line shows the mid-term review capital programme needs going across the 6 years, and then there's a red line that shows the current allocations, and you can see just a widening gap, which means we can't get these things built. The regulator took a very, very close look at the capital programme, and they were able to opine and say there's a block of costs here that have definitely gone up, and we recognise that, and that needs funded. They took a number of other costs in some of the schemes and said, we want to take a closer look at that, and we will work with you, Northern Ireland Water, to come back around that at the end of the price control. So we're still in dialogue with them on that. They also, by the way, I think it's important to point out that when they looked at the resource dial as well, they said your resource dial costs have naturally gone up because of inflation. Despite your best efforts around efficiency and the efficiency targets they give us, they've said there has been an increase in the need. And even if we in the room here think about things like national insurance, for instance, contributions have gone up since then, we have to reflect that through our payroll costs and so on. So those kind of costs have gone up, but we know that there's constraint within the budget back at the 151 release that you were talking about earlier. This year our budget probably started sitting an estimate of about 170, and we've managed to kind of grind that all the way back down, sometimes maybe not covering all the areas we should be covering. We've had to kind of really pick and choose what we do. We've managed to take it down to this about 156 million number, but it's probably worth saying to the committee, we probably cannot sustain this going down and continue to go down to that level. We will start to have to miss things out that we ought to be doing.
And I think just in your mid-term review, the blue line in the graph, what that sentence is saying is we're going to look at, there's a basket of work that had got more expensive, and we're going to look to see what the right number of how much more expensive it has got, and there was a line in there that said, and for sure your capital need is higher than what was found in the mid-term review, because when you take that block of money that they were going to reassess, there would be additional costs required, and we would be recovering that through the tariffs and continuing to do the work would be the theory of how that would work.
That's great. That's really useful. Slowly, that inevitably getting my head around all this sort of stuff. Listen, folks, thank you so much for your time today. It was very comprehensive questioning by the committee. We always welcome witnesses here to learn a wee bit more about where we are in one of the most critical areas, I think, that the committee is considering. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. In terms of actions or further information, Michael, will I come to you first in terms of things that perhaps you picked up on the way through there, or for members highlight anything?
Information we were to be supplied with. They were to come back to us on non-operational reservoirs for Harry.
Yep.
And then they were going to summarise the numbers from the NI Audit Office report and the Fiscal Council report, and perhaps other reports around the audit of the cost of the economy.
Okay. Members, anything else you want to highlight from that session or require more information on, Harry?
I was just thinking, Chair, as far as developments being stopped at the minute or slowed on businesses, is it the Northern Ireland Water advises the planning, no, you can't go ahead with this development because we can't cope with the usage of water? Is that how, just sort of like a clear picture of how that works, who makes the decision? That's okay, Chair?
Yep. Michael, does that go to does that one to DFI or Northern Ireland Water or to?
Well, we could ask the department.
Yeah. Okay. No, we'll get that.
The decision-making process.
Decision-making process. Yeah. No. Just to get a bit of clarity on that, Harry. That's
and again, I mean, my point is 605 litres per water or a unit. Yeah, we all use. So like to me, break down the area into town, county, country, island, whatever way you want. That's what we use per person. So unless there's an influx of people, there really shouldn't be a problem if we're either here or here. Do you understand what I mean?
It's a startling figure, I have to say. That was one of the highlights.
Yeah.
I just had no idea that we use that much water in Northern Ireland. I think they said every day.
Every
It's
day.
incredible.
Yeah.
John.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, it would be good to get that clarity, although my understanding is that there are thousands and thousands of planning applications that have been approved. Hence, we know the number of the developments currently stalled, but then NI Water say you can't connect to our network.
Yep.
So they're approved on the condition that they can get into the network. NI Water then go to the developer and say there is no capacity, and the project stops until the capacity is released.
I understand.
We made that point several times in previous sessions where I used the analogy of the school, where the kids were living in Larkin, and if they weren't in their house, they would be in the school. You can't use two loos at once. So they were either going to be using the same network, and it was still blocked. So the rationale was that the kids couldn't be either at their home or at the school at the same time. It didn't matter. It didn't matter because the rule was simply that.
Yeah.
We similarly had a discussion, because these are obviously decisions taken by NI Water, when we raised the 5-year rule around the economic and commercial sites, where for 4 years and 364 days, up to that point, someone could go in, develop it and reuse it as part of the system. Once it passed the 5 years, it's unusable sites, and they decided that it was 5 years, not 10 and not 15. We tried to get some progress in that, and we were told it was fait accompli effectively. So these are obviously rules, and probably sticks to beat the department and the executive with to get more funding, because the more flexible they become, then the harder it is to get the additional funding that's needed, I would imagine.
More funding or better management.
Justin.
Thanks, Chair. Maybe indulging my curiosity a little bit, Chair, and that is this innovative approach in Uri, which now is, I think, has gone to a new level, which with Floridian companies engaged to use AI to explore all of the discharge coming into a treatment plant. How could that approach be copied and mimicked across departments to ensure our public services work at a better level? So I'm just curious to know how that actually happened, how that came about. How did the Floridian company get engaged to adopt an innovative approach in Uri and a sewer? I'm very curious.
Yep, no, that's fine. We can write to Northern Ireland Water and just ask for background on that. I think you picked up on it, Justin. It's a really interesting piece of work, just using AI and monitoring to actually identify the outputs in order to, if you don't know what the problem is and you don't know what the scale of the problem is, it's hard to fix. So actually having those numbers clearly has been very helpful for Northern Ireland Water. I don't see anyone else there. Our members agreed just to seek those. Seek those answers.
Just to clarify, we're writing to the department to ask what's the process for deciding where developments can't proceed because of the lack of wastewater capacity, and to ask about planning applications that have been approved but have been stopped because of that, because there's no wastewater capacity. Yeah. Is that members' understanding of what we're asking for? And then to NI Water to ask about this the new technology and use of AI and how that came about, the origin of that.
Everyone content? Mm-hmm. Okay, that's great. Folks, I would suggest it's just after 12, which is probably the largest one we've had so far. I suggest that maybe break for 5 minutes, and then we'll take the oral evidence from the department on the community transport phase 2. So if we just go to right. Folks, welcome back to the committee. We will be taking some oral evidence now from the department on their update on community transport, their phase 2 review. For members, I would take you to page 60, which is the clerk's memo on the update. At page 63, we have the update on the community transport review, and that was provided through a letter from the DALO. And so I'd like to welcome Peter, Leona and John from the department. I just need to seek committee agreement that this evidence session is recorded by Hansard. Do I have committee agreement?
Great.
And as the members get settled, I would just say that you can make a brief opening statement of up to 10 minutes. and then you would expect some questions from the committee, but we're in your hands.
Okay, thanks, Chair, and thanks for inviting us again. I know we were here last year, but I know there are some new members on the committee, so I'm going to do a wee bit of a presentation, a wee bit of a potted history in terms of community transport, and then also a bit more detail in terms of where we are on the Phase 2 review. So, community transport, really, this is filling a gap between what public transport provides and also what private operators. It has been organically grown, evolved over the years into the system we have today. And the current system has been in place since 2013 without really many changes. I should say community transport is relatively small in the grand scheme of public transport. And this slide here is just trying to sort of elaborate that. So you have the main public transport, which is Translink, through the various mechanisms. You have community transport that the department funds, and that's primarily Lift, which relates to accessibility in the rural environment. And then you have Disability Action Transport Scheme, and again that's more towards providing access for people with disabilities who can't use public transport. Outside of that, there you have a large other numbers in the transport sector. You've got the health sector, education sector, and indeed other elements of the community transport. To put that into perspective, I think Translink has around 1,400 vehicles. I think education sector has around 800 buses, 700. There are around about 7,500 taxis registered in Northern Ireland, and community transport has access to 75 vehicles. So that's sort of the scale of the service that they're providing. This is a sort of trying to understand or show where the department is funding those various community transport sectors. So the Rural Transport Fund, through Lift, is funding that accessibility in the rural environments, and that's delivered by the 11 rural transport community providers. On the other side, on the urban environment, you've got the transport programme for people with disabilities, and that funds DATS. And then that's delivered by two companies, Bridge Accessible Transport and Disability Action. But it's also delivered by the 11 RTCPs as well. Community Transport Review. So this was launched by Minister Dowd 2023. So the review of that there was to look at role of community transport in the wider public sector environment, and also to look at ensuring that department's getting value for money in terms of delivery of those services through that sector. The Phase 1 report was completed earlier this year, and it was shared with stakeholders and indeed this committee. I think it was in and around March this year. And that Phase 1 report really was the building blocks for this review in Phase 2. It was primarily looking at a lot of data collection, doing a lot of questionnaires, surveys of the sector and the users of that there. They get a better understanding of how they use the service and the service they provide. In terms of the Phase 2 review, the team, John and Leona, were taking forward this review, and it started earlier this year. I think it was we briefed the committee back in springtime. And really that review is looking at a number of elements, looking at where the policy environment is in terms of for the community transport sector, then also looking at the performance of the sector through those two groups I was talking about, both in terms of financial performance and indeed in terms of actually outputs and deliverabilities. Following on from that there, we're looking at what is the service delivery model? What is the most appropriate model we should be using for Northern Ireland? And then going on to that and going, well, how would you fund that idealised service delivery model? So over the last 9 months or so, the team have been out, but a lot of engaging with the various stakeholders, working closely with the Community Transport Association and indeed those 13 providers I talked to earlier, and collecting a lot of the data. We aren't there yet in terms of completing the Phase 2 review, but some of the issues we've identified and challenges that have been encountered is in terms of, well, also the policy environment in which they're operating. I mentioned the Lift and DATS. That policy process, that policy that informs that has been in place since 2013. Also coming out some of the other challenges is the complexity of what we have there. Some of the earlier slides showed, you have two different schemes for urban and rural. You've got different providers. The majority of the providers are providing both of those schemes using the same resources, both buses and staff. So there's complexities around that there. Added to that there are complexities in and around the data. You're trying to allocate. We're funding two different schemes being provided by the same provider. How do you allocate those resources? How does that be appropriately distributed across the two schemes. How is that recorded? Then in your terms of analysis, then there's an issue around data quality. And then also you're looking into the complexities of trying to compare data lift and DATS. Other issues came out was obviously funding. So the funding over the last number of years has been remained relatively static. We also had COVID, which also impacted on funding for the schemes, but also the deliverability of the schemes, and that also influenced the number of data that we had against that. In terms of finance and performance, so we have gone through that there, looked at the various information from the various suppliers. And I suppose, skipping on, this slide sort of shows a number of issues that are coming out. So in terms of funding, as I mentioned, the funding for the schemes has been relatively static up until this year. And then there was a 25% increase across the board for those two schemes. In terms of the usage, so there's 7,000 active members between the two programmes. That has actually been declining in the last couple of years, and I suppose that's linked to the availability of funding. In terms of trips, the two groups or the two programmes are providing, you're looking at around 250,000 trips are being provided. That has remained relatively static between the two schemes. In comparison, TransLink is looking at 65 million plus passenger journeys, not quite comparing like with like, but again, in terms of the scale, it's just showing where community transport sits within the wider public transport. In terms of the makeup of the trips, so you have some trips that are one-to-one, and some trips are one-to-many. And in terms of the rural environment and the Dela lift, there's a majority or more the one-to-many, which would indicate that the buses are being used more efficiently because you get more people using that bus at a single time. Whereas on the disability action, it's the reverse, and that's more linked to more one-to-one. Now, it probably reflects the circumstances of the individual users that using that service. But that's just some of the information we're gathering. In terms of service delivery model, we've looked at other jurisdictions, primarily Great Britain and in the south of Ireland, and they're all using, I suppose, three different main types of service delivery. One is government directly delivers the service. The other one is the government procures that service to a third party through some sort of procurement and contract, or the government provides a grant and it's provided by some sort of social enterprise. That final version is what we currently have within Northern Ireland. Those types of models are generally in use across the various regions in some shape or form, and some of them are hybrid. What's coming out of the review at this minute time is there's not a silver bullet. We aren't seeing a service delivery model. We go, that's a good replacement that you can just drop into Northern Ireland and do that there. But it does reflect that Northern Ireland service delivery model we have at the minute is aligned to what's going on in other jurisdictions. Some of the other issues in terms of the themes coming out, operational performance. I mentioned earlier, 13 different providers over two schemes. Not all those providers are providing you the same service in the same way. And as you might expect, there are differences in performances, because there's a variety in terms of the cost per trips, and also the number of registered users, and also in the number of trips. There are legitimate reasons why there would be variations, but that variation also gives you an opportunity. There will be best practice out there that could be used in other areas that could drive down efficiency or improve output. In terms of the management, one of the issues, again, as reflected earlier, is the fact that we have two schemes, with the majority of the providers providing both schemes. That added complication in terms of how that's being managed. So there is, we think, an opportunity to try and address that there, potentially streamline either the schemes or the management of the schemes. Legislative constraints we've identified, and I'm sure the committee's heard it before, about the B10 licence. That's been undertaken as a review within the department. I think it's fairly well advanced, and I imagine officials will be coming to the committee in the near future regarding that there. But we aren't leading in that there, but we are aware of it, and we will reflect the outcomes of that review within the final version of ours. Operational delivery constraints, we do hear from stakeholders around constraints on how they're delivering their operations. Some it's around flexibility, the geographical location, funding constraints, some of the terms and conditions that we give to them in terms of the grants. So those have been flagged up to the review team, and we're also conscious of, well, how could we address that there? So we're aware of that. Funding constraints, there will always be a funding constraint, irrespective of the budget, and that was probably reflected in recent years where the funding was remained relatively static, and we would aware of from stakeholders that was causing real issues in terms of deliverability. This year, because of the increase in funding, that is, I wouldn't say it has alleviated, but it's definitely gone a long way in improving the ability for the community transport suppliers or providers to deliver that service. It's not quite a 25% increase in funding, therefore it's a 25% increase in outputs. We are conscious that would have led, that 25% increase had to cover increased costs in the delivery of the services, but it will go towards improving it. So those are the factors that have been flagged up to the review team. As I mentioned, we are not in a position to conclude phase 2 yet. Our intention is, we're on track by Christmas. We would hope to have the phase 2 a draft of the phase 2 report ready that we'll be able to share with stakeholders, including this committee. That would give us an opportunity for those stakeholders to feedback on what we've encountered, what our views on some of that is. We could get that back in January, and then that will enable us to consider that they're with the intention of producing a final report towards the end of February onwards. So apologies for rushing through, but that's a quick history of the community transport and the current review. Happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Peter. That was very interesting, especially for someone like me who's coming this very fresh and without perhaps all the knowledge that committee members who maybe heard your presentation earlier in the year. Look, just if I pick up on a couple of things, and they're quite general, but on workstream 2, it mentioned about identifying alternative operational delivery options for community transport, and you've sort of outlined some of the ways that that's currently delivered. You also mentioned about the sort of identification, I wouldn't call it best practice, but how other areas do this in terms of the South and the rest of the UK. I mean, have you identified any other delivery options thus yet, and any costs and benefits associated with those?
If I Chair, I'll answer the question and I'll pass to John and Leona to give the detail on it. At this stage, I suppose the three models I refer to there about direct government provision, contract, or through some sort of grant, seem to be the three main mechanisms that we have encountered. As I mentioned in the presentation, we haven't identified one that is much better than others. There is a theme coming through that review that would be the service needs to be tailored to the local environment, that there isn't a one-size-fits-all. Our thinking is we are unlikely to go to a regional solution. Think the solution that we're looking for in terms of still has to reflect the local needs within each of those areas. And in terms of the other jurisdictions, those three types of service delivery model that I mentioned, I think they all go towards a hybrid. It's not a pure, we will deliver this through government funding or we'll deliver this through social enterprise. They use a mixture of hybrid, and I think that's probably the direction of travel. And before I put my foot in it, I'll pass to Leona in case there's anything else you want to add to that.
Just on your bit there about the cost benefit of the different service delivery options, I suppose we haven't had the time or the capacity within this review to really do a deep dive on that. You know, what we've done is looked at the different options and made a relatively high level assessment of those to say, well, these are the bits that we like out of that. So the next stage probably would be, if you're wanting to change anything there, you would do that deeper dive on the cost benefit analysis of it. You know, but the work that we're doing around the finance and the performance would help inform that cost benefit analysis, because that's helped us to get to a point now where we have a better understanding of how much it costs to deliver the services that we have already. So if you wanted to grow the community transport sector and introduce different services beyond what we have already, we sort of have a better idea now of what that might cost, because we can sort of roughly say well, just to have one bus on the road for a year costs us about 40 grand to keep that bus on the road for a year, which we didn't necessarily have that understanding before. So this is all just building up a picture for us.
Okay. Just following on from that, just in terms of the answer, you mentioned the hybrid model, and I guess if you were looking at how to deliver community transport and it was a tender process, you'd probably be looking at a couple of quantifiables. You might look at, for example, cost and quality. You know how much it costs and what quality it provides. In terms of how you look at community transport, do you look at it in terms of trying to get the best value for money, or do you look at it with other slightly more non-tangible benefits? And how would you decide between those, what those quantifiables would be?
I think that's the direction of travel. So we're not in a position to say this is the service delivery model that we would recommend going forward, and this is the criteria that would accompany that there. You're right, Chair, in terms of, I suppose, irrespective of whether you went for a grant system or for a procurement system, you would want to be clear in terms of what are your expectations of the outputs from this here. And that would be in terms of the inputs, how much funding are you prepared to put into it, and therefore what are your expectations coming out of that there. In terms of where do you value the outputs, a balanced decision in terms of, do you want, I mentioned earlier in the presentation, a system that has one to many, or are you looking at a case where it is one to one? I suspect the answer is somewhere in between, because what we are trying to provide is at this stage accessibility in a rural environment, and also in an urban environment we're trying to provide accessibility to people with disabilities or who can't use public transport. Is there a solution that provides both? I think you will, that's why you're going to end up with a hybrid in terms of how do you try and address both of those needs, and there will need to be a judgment call at some point in terms of how you would, what that criteria would be, whether you put all of the emphasis on accessibility or all of the emphasis on efficiency, or do you land somewhere in the middle? I suspect it'll be in the middle, but
that's fine, Peter. One more short one from me then, and then I'll hand across to John. I mean, it sounds a little bit like we have a hybrid model, doing a review, and we're maybe just keep a hybrid model. I mean, do you sense that's where you're going to? So I appreciate the review and also the detail in it. It sounds a little bit like we certainly have that hybrid model between, I think it's DAL and DATS, if I got my acronyms down rightly, as you went through. One of those goes quite far, and one of them's kind of nearer in terms of journey time. One of them tends to be more one-to-one, and one of them tends to be one-to-many, I think was the terminology you used. So we have this kind of hybrid model already. Do you have any sense that, we're going to do a review and we're going to just keep things the way they are, because that's what we have? We have a sort of a hybrid model there. Is that a fair question, Peter?
Well, I'm going to say I don't want to prejudge the review. So we are working our way through that there. So there's a due process to go through that there in terms of the current system has been placed since 2013. I think if there was a eureka moment of, we should replace that with why, officials, stakeholders would have identified that before now. So I think your summary of the direction of travel is, I think we're probably heading that direction. But we do need to go through the process. Leona's looking at me with eyes to go.
Yeah, well, but I would say, the service delivery model is quite a high level conceptual framework for how the services operate, but there's still a lot of scope underneath that in terms of how you configure the services and what particular services that you have, where there's a lot of change that you could make or a lot of improvements that you could make to the way things happen. So it's not a case of we'll probably turn around at the end and say, oh, everything's fine and we'll move on. There's still, even within that, there's lots of scope to do things.
There could be tinkering. What you're describing there, Leona, is there is a high level review, but there could be things that are moved around slightly lower level to produce better outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. And just maybe as an example, you at the minute everything in Dial-A-Lift and DATS, the majority of trips are delivered by 16-seater minibuses. Most of the rural providers would have some element of social car schemes that they use as well to supplement that, which sort of helps keep those trip times down and helps sort of manage that ratio of 1 to many trips. So there's things you could do there to make more single vehicles accessible to tackle the service in a different way and make it work better. So
Probably better than environment as well, I'd imagine, if you're running a car or a minibus. No, that's fine. Thank you very much, guys. Deputy Chair.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, folks, again for coming along. Appreciate the latest update, and I appreciate this as a work in progress. And I just want to take a moment to praise all of our community transport teams. And you know as much as I do that the amazing work that they do. In my area, we have the South Antrim Community Transport team. They do a wonderful job as well. But it's fair to say that many of these organisations are running on borrowed faith when it comes to getting the necessary funding and the support. And I know that this is part of the piece of work that you're doing, but it would be remiss of me not to praise them for that. You listed in one of the slides, we talked about the operational delivery constraints and the funding constraints, particularly affecting some of the delivery, some of the providers within that. Funding's obviously been an issue for a long time. Could you just talk us more about the operational delivery constraints? I'm assuming that's access to volunteers and dwindling volunteers, aging fleets, the difficulty in actually getting on the road and all that goes with it. And in your engagement with these providers, how vulnerable do you sense they are going forward?
Well, I think we were here earlier in the spring, and that issue of vulnerability was mentioned. I'll stand corrected by John or Leona. I don't think vulnerability in terms of those organisations, in terms of as a going concern, or continue to provide that service. I do recognise that there was a genuine concern in terms of costs had been going up and funding hadn't kept pace with that there. I think this year's allocation from the Minister went a long way to addressing that there, and in terms of the quantum of the requests from which those community transport providers was facilitated and provided as part of the budget allocation. So I don't think there's an issue regarding their continuation. Hopefully colleagues will support that. In terms of the operational difficulties, so some of the things, and Leona's maybe alluded to it, in and around some of the terms and conditions of the grant funding to the providers seems to be an issue, and therefore if it's causing an issue operationally, we might need to look at those terms and conditions. There's also issues around flexibility, and you know, each of the providers operate within a geographical location, but again there are pressures, needs to sometimes go outside those geographical locations, but not for a regional wide service. So then you're into, is there able to provide some flexibility in and around that there to try and address some of those operational issues. And I think that's probably the two main ones. Maybe pass to Leona or John for if you want to come in.
Yeah, well, I think John mentioned, you probably mentioned most of the ones I would have mentioned there in your start of your question. But yeah, we have been discussing those things, you know, with the providers, and there are some that there are obvious things that we can maybe do because they're within our gift to change. There are others that are more difficult to tackle. One of the constraints that they will mention frequently is ability to recruit and retain staff, drivers in particular, because they're competing with the private sector and with other parts of the public sector that can offer more attractive pay and conditions, you know, because they can offer them a long-term contract, they can offer them pensions and all the rest, whereas in community transport they tend to be working for minimum wage. So those are things that there's no easy short-term fix for those, but we are trying to identify the barriers that we can do things about and change some of those things. Some of them are legislative, some of them are linked to the 10B review that Peter mentioned, and I know they have identified some ways in which some of those barriers can be tackled. Okay.
No, I think that was the point I was getting to, and absolutely no doubt, Peter, I agree with you. The vulnerability, the piece I was talking about, was not the going concern. I think these organisations, I know, they're dedicated to providing at any level they can a provision. The vulnerabilities around the capacity, and it's particularly around the need to get more volunteers, getting and keeping drivers, the conditions that they're having to work in, and all of that. And I suppose it's within the terms of trying to maybe extends the remit and role of these community organisations, community groups and providers, is how we make sure that they're there when we need them to step up again. And I think about that around the piece of transforming health and how these groups will play a vital role providing transport to health facilities around the country particularly. It's essential that we make sure that they have the capacity to provide that when we need them to step up. And I'm just wondering, with the limited powers that we have, how that's being done.
Well, at the minute, through the Della lift, there is a lot of that services is for providing local access, and that includes local access to the health facilities, whether it be dentists or GPs, etc. But it is within a local area, and again, that would be the intention that, you know, this is looking at transport in a local area, not a regional. So, and I think need to be careful of thinking that community transport could probably gear up to providing a service that could provide access to hospitals and other across the region. That under the domain of Department of Health, and they have a mechanism there for providing that. They're definitely at a local level, but if I'm going to use an example of the hospitals, if you decide, well, actually, we want to expand that there to give them the capacity to go to various acute hospitals, if that's a bus, you're tying up a bus for a much longer journey of period of time, potentially sitting at the other end waiting on that patient coming out and back again. That time away and that use of the bus means that they can't provide a service in their local area to more people, providing more access. So we need to be careful of where we're pushing towards service delivery model is towards continue to focus on the local service rather than a regional. Anything else?
No, I think the main points are covered there. Certainly, I suppose volunteers was maybe took a bit of a hit since COVID, but that has been.
I think it's everywhere across all organisations.
And I think there's probably a higher dependency on recruitment across the board here now. Boundaries is sort of committed as well, a wee bit of flexibility beyond sort of distinct boundaries that the bus turns and comes back again, sort of thing. So, I suppose just even from my own experience, you know, local is good, but it also presents a challenge. It is quite restrictive in what it sort of does as well, sort of things. So there's positive, you know, obviously the positive for the members are, you know, they're regular drivers, there's confidence and security in the services that are being provided. But as Peter said, then once you start taking resources out of a particular area, well then you pressurise sort of your existing sort of services. Right?
Well, that's good to know. The final point then is just back to the point you made, Peter, about health having its own role within this. I'm just curious, within the piece of work you're doing, what engagement you've had with the Department of Health regarding how they see the role of community transport and extending that. I know the Minister has said that he sees a key role for it, and it's obviously got to work hand in glove between your department, their department, and the network. So
and that sort of sits alongside this review, which in terms of there's a cross-departmental working group between our Department of Health and DERA around how best can we utilise community transport resources in order to help both DERA and DOH deliver their services. So that working group has been going on for a while, and it has improved communications, improved relationships, better understanding of the environment which the various departments are working in. There has been a bit of a re-emphasis from the relevant ministers in terms of seeing slightly more output from that working group in terms of tangible benefits of where that can lead to. So that work's still ongoing. Leona sits on the working group, so we are pushing colleagues within DOH to understand really what is their need, and then back to, well, how can community transport potentially meet some or all of that there. I don't think it could be all given the scale of the health service, but there could be a role, and it has been talked about for a number of years around this here. And again, I'll go back to that phrase, if there was an easy solution, it would have been implemented a long time ago. So it's a very challenging environment in order to do that there. But again, I think, again, the political support there in terms of we should be getting on and trying to identify pragmatic arrangements for that there is something we've taken on board, and we're progressing.
Okay. So that working group is working simultaneous to the work streams that you're carrying out. Are there any notional ideas of when they might conclude the work and report back on what can and can't be done? Or
we don't have a timetable this minute in time, but we can come back to you.
Yeah, that would be useful. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much, Deputy Chair. Next is Harry.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much. I'm looking at just some figures, 75 vehicles. I'm just wondering, What's your staff numbers? Do you know a breakdown of your staff numbers and your drivers, roughly?
I think the total number of staff is maybe about just over 100 or 120,
Okay.
something like that. It's not a huge number. I can't remember off the top of my head, but we do have the figures. We have them all broken down by the different organisations, so I can't remember the
We
total.
can come back
but
to you with that.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's okay.
but it's not a huge number.
Would that include the drivers?
Yeah, that would include the
Oh.
drivers. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing what you do with those numbers. And out of those numbers, how many would be voluntary?
Drivers, less voluntary drivers. You know, there wouldn't be that many. If each of them had maybe one voluntary driver, that would be it, because of the licensing requirements
Yes.
that you have to have certain standards and things like that. You know, their voluntary drivers are more on the social car side, where you've got the social car volunteers who use their own car to take people to and fro. But obviously that sort of, you're relying on the volunteers, and there's, as John alluded to, there's been a struggle to kind of get volunteers in the last few years. So I know the organisations all talk a lot with each other, trying to, you know, somebody might contact one and they're actually in the neighbours area to actually volunteer, and they sort of manage that between themselves. And some don't do any volunteer cars at all, and so others have quite a big network that they've built up over years. But
Very good. And as far as disability action goes itself, it hasn't a high number of vehicles. Sure, would it have just one or two vehicles, or?
no, John, do you know the
No, I
number
think
there?
the disability action would have probably eight or
Would it?
10 or
Okay.
something like that there, you know,
Yeah.
for their direct delivery within Belfast and the Greater Belfast area.
So it's just Greater Belfast?
Yeah.
Bridge and
Yeah.
Derry would have
Yeah.
similar then.
Some similar, I imagine.
Okay. No, appreciate it. Thank you very much. And I mean, I know it is a lifeline to some people, and really do appreciate where you go. Know where I'm from, down community transport's a huge success and a huge lifeline to so many people. So, yep, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Harry. Militia.
It's just it's very nice meeting with you. I've never met with you before. It's my first time in this committee. Just in relation, you know, I know that in the area that I live in, which is a rural area, Castledare, West Tyrone, that the communities in the surrounding area, i.e., depend very much on Easy Lift and that in Strabane, for a lot of the work on that they do there. Are there particular difficulties that you would perceive, as say at present, that would be peculiar to those border regions?
I'm going to say no, but I'm not too sure.
Well, just the, you know, sort of Fermanagh and Tyrone generally, you know, given their rurality and the distance, you know, you've got that extra distance and the extra mileage that maybe the buses have to cover to get people to their nearest town where they're going to do whatever they're going to do, you know, so that just provides that little bit extra challenge in managing that and delivering that and trying to keep your costs under control, you know. So I know EasyLink and Fermanagh both, for example, you know, we've seen in the analysis that they very much try and manage their mileage through the use of their social cars and try to use the social car to maybe pick up the person who's an outlier there and keep the bus in a sort of relatively compact area so that the bus is travelling less miles, and they use that way to keep their costs down and things like that. So you've got those challenges just because of the geography. I suppose as well it always comes up in the areas that border the Republic, you know, about the cross-border element, that we're kind of restricted about, you know, we can't go across the border into another jurisdiction because there's obviously licensing and insurance and different things there that aren't that easy to operate. So we do get queries about that at times, but it's not something we've specifically looked at here, but I know that is an issue.
In fact, I was actually alluding to that, you know, that I'm very aware of that difficulty that people have had in terms of cross-border, and that's where they had to do a whole detour because they weren't allowed to cross over the border. And I wonder to what extent maybe is consideration being given to addressing both that issue and in terms of, we'll say, working in cooperation with agencies on the other side of the border and delivering services.
It's not something that we've specifically looked at in this review, but it has been flagged up as an issue that, you know, we'll try and acknowledge that issue in the review and sort of make some suggestions about maybe what could be done to kind of investigate that further. I think as well maybe the 10B review has got some reference in there around the licensing and that aspect of that, you know, how that could be facilitated. So depending on what they kind of feedback as well, they have maybe identified some opportunities where we can get around those technical sort of legislative barriers to that, you know, and that would be the first step towards sort of doing something operationally, probably.
Well, apart from it being a feature, we'll say in the rural areas, interestingly enough, there was a situation in Derry, in the city itself, and where it's right on the border as well too, that when traffic was being detoured as a result of maybe a traffic accident or the likes of it, the bus, because it couldn't follow the detoured route into the Republic and out again, that it imposed sort of a nearly a 15-mile journey additional for them. And I know where I live as well too, every day going from Castleberg to Strabane, I cross the border about 3 times, 3 times in and out. So it is a feature, and when it comes to EasyLink and that, they deliver good service in our community and that we'd like to see sort of them being supported in every way possible, you know, to ensure they can maintain the type of service that they have, and it is that hybrid type service that you alluded to. So, okay, Gromagos, Chair.
Thank you very much, Manisha. Next is Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. A lot of topics have been covered, not least the good words for County Down, rural transport, or the community transport. So echo that. Just coming back on to you sort of touched on it there a couple of times now about the D1 and the licensing and the legislative constraints. I mean, is that the only? Are there other areas of legislation that might need to sort of becoming tweaked as we come down the river here, or is it just the licensing?
That's the primary one. That's the sort of.
Those are the 2 main ones, and the other one is the taxi operator licence regulations around that, because if any of the community transport operators wanted to buy a smaller car, like up to an 8-seater car that was wheelchair accessible, for example, currently they would potentially need a taxi operator licence and a taxi driver licence for the driver. It is something that I know the team working on the 10B permit review have picked that up as part of that, and I know that they're addressing that in their review. I don't want to preempt what they're saying, but I know that they have looked at it. They have looked at it, and I think they have a couple of options in there around that, sort of an administrative one and a legislative one, maybe.
Will there be legislative implications or themes coming down then?
Yeah, there's some things I think that they think, you know, the department can issue updated guidance on, and other things that might require legislation changes. None of which I don't think are unachievable, but those would be the 3 main areas of legislation that sort of have some kind of impact on the service delivery here, and the kind of services that the operators, as they are currently existing, can deliver under those.
Okay. Oh, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Andrew. Justin.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Peter, Leona, John. Where would we be as a society without community transport?
Where would we be?
Oh, sorry, I thought that was a statement rather than a question. I suppose, good point. I suppose I mentioned earlier in the presentation, community transport is a relatively small element of the wider public transport. So for in the grand scheme of things, it's relatively small. For the individuals, it's very, very important. And I think that's recognised through this committee's interest in it and the amount of interest we get from various stakeholders. So it does play a vital role for those individuals who are able to access community transport. I suppose I should have said it maybe earlier, these schemes are member-only schemes. They aren't open to the public, so therefore you have to be a member of the scheme. And maybe that's possibly reflected in the relatively small numbers. But it does provide a unique, vital service to those 7,000 active members.
There's actually the Community Transport Association, who oversee community transport organisations across the UK. They have worked for a number of years on a piece of work called a social value index, and they've just shared with us recently their latest figures on that. So they collect a lot of metrics from across the board and use that to kind of create an estimate of the value that every pound of funding that you put into community transport has to the wider economy, or the wider social value within their area. So the figures for 23-24 are something like, for every pound of funding that goes into community sector here, it adds £2.55 of value to the local social sector. So you're more than doubling the value. Like we that year was 4.3 million, I think, of funding into the sector. So they estimated it. The value to the local economy in Northern Ireland was 12.5 million or something like that. So getting these people, although it might be a small number of people, helping them to get out and about and live their lives and do the things that we all take for granted, does have a big impact on the just local businesses, local shops, those people's lives. It connects people. The clue is in the title of community transport. It is a community service, and you just have to go out on one of the buses to see that it's about more than just numbers on a spreadsheet. I went out on one of the buses when I first joined in the local area where I live, and sort of within half an hour I met somebody I was related to and found out that the manager of the company is married to my mother's cousin or something. So it's all about community, and it's all about connecting people, and it's about more than just money. So we're very mindful of that in the review, that we just don't get our heads stuck in a spreadsheet and forget about that wider picture.
Yeah, I think we're all to a small degree guilty of bashing everything, but listen, you deserve enormous credit. Rural transport and community transport operators deserve enormous credit. That's 155% return on investment. That is incredible, incredibly positive, and such a important lifeline, as Harry has already alluded to so many individuals, families and communities. And I've seen it meeting organisations, and they're very, very proud of the service that they fulfil. They recognise the importance of it and the value of it, and long may it continue. Where are the biggest challenges facing community and rural transport right now? Or what are the biggest challenges?
Did you take that?
Yes, sorry.
We've talked about funding a lot. That remains the biggest challenge that they'll always have. For the last 10 years that we've looked at, nearly every year it's been an annual budget from the civil service. We all know the difficulties annual budgets create, and that has constrained their ability to develop and grow as organisations, because you're living hand to mouth from one year to the next. So that on its own is the single biggest probably obstacle for them. That in its turn creates other problems. We've mentioned this, staff and recruiting staff and retraining staff, because you can't run the service without them. The lack of capital funding as well, particularly, will start to have an impact if we don't do something about that, because at some point the fleets of vehicles that they have will reach an age where they need to be replaced. You can't keep repairing a 10-year-old, 12-year-old bus to keep it on the road. It becomes not cost effective at some point. So those are the two biggest sort of challenges that they have probably at the minute, I would say. Is there anything else, John, you would add?
Yeah, and probably just making sure, or going over that, what the structure of sort of the two schemes at the moment, that they are meeting the people that really need the services, and ensuring that's happening. I think from our perspective, yeah, definitely those couple of ones with the staff and recruitment and retention of the fully trained staff, particularly, I suppose, once people acquire their DCPC licence, that the word becomes a bit bigger then, sort of thing. So it's recruiting the good staff. Whenever I'm talking to the managers, they're saying the staff are really brilliant, and they're very loyal to their employers and stuff like that there. But it's a challenging environment, so financially all round, sort of thing. So vehicle retention is probably another one, sort of in the challenge, on a sort of longer term as well.
Okay, and to what degree should community and rural transport be considered as a vital part of the health service?
I couldn't hear that. A vital part of the what?
The health service.
Health service.
I think, as I alluded to earlier on in my earlier answer, DOH are responsible for the delivery of health services. Community transport is focused on, as Leona says, community, local areas, and they currently do provide access to local health facilities, and there's nothing in the review to say that's going to change. As John alluded to, the review's looking at how do we ensure that the schemes in the future are targeting those areas that we talked about in terms of accessibility to local services, or access to transport for people who can't access public transport. So it really is a key element of enabling people in rural areas to access their local services, which includes those health services.
Okay, folks, well done. Keep going. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Justin. And can I thank John, Peter, and Leona for coming this morning? I think we've probably covered everything that the committee wants to, so just remains me to say all the best for the rest of your day. Thank you very much.
Thanks everyone, appreciate it. Keep up the good work.
I'm glad we weren't as long as NI Water.
What's that?
I'm glad we weren't as long as NI Water. I'm sure you are too.
Michael, anything that is actionable from the session?
Just that the officials said they would come back with numbers of staff by organisation to the committee. So it's whatever members want to action on that.
It's fine. Okay. Thank you, guys. So we've got that one. We've got that one sorted. Anything else from committee members in terms of information they require? Is that it? Okay, that's fine.
Maybe, Chair, maybe the age of the buses, just to get our guide to what sort of vehicles are using, what age.
I know what age the buses are.
Because there seemed to be a little concern that there were maybe old, so it's just the age of fleet.
That's fine, Harry. We'll get that. We'll ask them and see if they know. I suspect they'll probably go back to the providers, but we'll get some information around that. Folks, that's item 9 then. The Water Sustainable Drainage and Flood Management Bill. Point you to a few bits and pieces on that. At page 66 we have the CEF response. Just to remind members that we will get some oral evidence from CEF next week at our meeting in Antrim when we're visiting a SUDS site, so please don't come here next week. We have the Red Cross's response at page 72, the Committee for Finance response at page 81, Derry City and Sabran District Council response at page 83. And I just need to seek committee agreement to publish the responses on the committee webpage and include it in the meeting folder for 10th of December 2025. Are we agreed? Okay. Item 10 is the Operation and Maintenance Resilience Review from the Department for Infrastructure. And there's written evidence there at page 87, the letter from the DALO at page 94, the draft report, and at page 167, the action plan summary. Members, I'm sure, have read this, but the only thing that I particularly want to highlight is that there's obviously a range of issues here, including quote, long-standing and systematic challenges that have eroded levels of trust and engagement across the entire workforce, leaving the business unit struggling to meet its essential mission. In addition to that, it has highlighted a workforce under strain, disillusionment with pay and recognition, leadership and communication failures, a stalled commitment to development, and a culture in need of renewal. And also just to highlight to members that DFI has a vacancy rate of 38%, and DFI are currently progressing an action plan. Any members want to comment on that in particular, or will I just keep going? I want to make sure people have a chance. I mean, in terms of my suggestion around this, that committee requests quarterly progress reports on DFI's performance to progress the action plan with a view to scheduling oral evidence on this issue at a further date. Our committee happy enough with that?
Happy with that, Stuart.
Andrew?
Chair, no, just one thing. I noticed in relation to a question that asked through AQWs or whatever, an increase on the amount spent on gully clearing and stuff like that. And I'm just actually wondering, does the huge vacancy rate and the issues that we're experiencing here, is there a correlation to extra spend essentially by the department on certain things? I mean, is that something that's worth looking at in order, you know, just to clarify as to how efficient the department is being when it comes to spend, if you get my meaning?
I nearly do. I'm kind of hoping that the important person that gets a meeting here is Michael on my left-hand side, if that can be phrased into an actionable. I wasn't quite sure. I mean, I have no issue with what you're saying, Andrew. It's what we would write to the department around.
It's just, you know, asking, is the the amount of posts vacant having
Detrimental impact
you know,
on
is there a direct
service delivery?
increase in the departmental spending? I mean, that's really, is that simple,
Okay.
Chair?
Captured. Yeah.
Yeah.
Happy
Sorry
enough with that,
for-
mate? Yeah.
And Chair, just to add that, I mean, my thoughts on it were the 38% vacancy. I mean, at what level? So basically, you know.
Okay. Yeah. So
Understand.
see if they have a readout in terms of are those vacancies at technical level
Yeah,
or
yeah,
operational or senior management. Justin, your hand is up, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just quite quick in relation to vacancy rates as well. 38% seems significantly high. How does that compare and contrast to industry norms across government? And what are the implications of that vacancy rate on the three-pronged approach?
Well done, Justin, getting the three prongs in again. We will note that and write out accordingly as long as members are agreed. Happy enough to leave that one there.
So
Michael?
just to clarify that what members are agreeing to. So first of all, the impact of the vacancies on well, the cost of the vacancies, the impact on spending. Where are the vacancies? What particular areas are they? Is this what are the norms across the Northern Ireland Civil Service? How does it compare with other vacancies in other departments? And what's the impact on the three-pronged approach? Happy enough?
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. That takes us on to item 11, which is SLs and SRs not subject to assembly procedure. And there are 3 SRs that are not subject to assembly proceedings and therefore are not required to be laid. They are at pages 181 to 192. And they are SR 2025 bar 181, the parking and waiting restrictions, Belfast Amendment number 2, Order Northern Ireland 2025. SR 2025 182, the waiting restrictions, Port Stewart Amendment Order Northern Ireland 2025. And SR 2025 bar 184, the parking places, disabled persons, vehicles, Amendment number 5, Order Northern Ireland 2025. And members may remember that we noted the proposals for these rules at our meetings on the 5th of November and the 12th of November. Are members content to note the SRs? Noted. Okay. Item 12 then is SLs, ISL1s, again not subject to assembly procedure. There are 3 proposals, SLs1, for statutory rules that are not subject to assembly procedures and are not required to be laid. They are on pages 194 to 203 of your pack, and they are as follows. SL1, parking places, disabled persons, vehicle, Amendment number 6, Order Northern Ireland 2025. SL1, the parking places on roads, coaches, Amendment number 2, Order Northern Ireland 2025. And SL1, the waiting restrictions, Springfield Road, Belfast, Amendment Order Northern Ireland 2025. Folks, just the SL1 on the parking places, disabled persons, vehicle, Amendment number 6 order does not contain any information to specify the locations of where parking spaces with unlimited waiting are being added to in Belfast, Londonderry, Newtownards or Warren Point. And the one for Londonderry, the proposal for the SR doesn't contain any information or location where DFI proposes to remove a parking space for disabled persons' vehicles in Londonderry. Whilst this rule is not subject to assembly procedure, it may be beneficial to seek further detail on locations affected under this proposal and to request data for future proposals that are of similar nature to ask that their relevant locations are contained within the SL1 as standard. It's a bit of a technical point, folks, but if they're going to do it, they may as well do it right. So I'm asking for committee agreement to write to the department to seek further detail of the precise locations that will be impacted by the proposals as set out in SL1 and to request that for any future proposals for similar statutory rules that they may contain a brief overview of the locations impacted. Do members have any issues they want to raise on this?
Just agreed, Chair. That's a good idea. Yep.
My view would be we hold this and wait till the department come back. We don't really have to. To be fair to the department, we're sort of cited on these things. They don't really have to, but it's custom and practice that they do, and they do come through this committee. But I would be quite keen that actually this is done the right way and these details are adhered to. So if members are content, can we bring this back next week before we agree it?
Yeah, as you say, Chair, it's always good to see, especially if it's in some of the areas we represent, to know exactly where these spaces are.
Okay,
We'll
do that then. Okay, so then I'll take you on to item 13, which is the forward work programme. It's at page 204, the draft programme. I just need agreement to proceed with the evidence session set out in the draft forward work programme and to reflect any decisions taken today. Are members agreed, or do they have any points to make? Agreed. Nope, agreed, okay. Any members have any other business? Nope. Therefore, item 15 is the date, time, location of the next meeting, and I just need to seek the committee's agreement for the next meeting to be held. Take note, folks, 10 a.m. on Wednesday, the 3rd of December at the Antrim Civic Centre. So whatever you do, don't come here, because we'll not be here.
Yeah, there'll be an email going out from the committee staff.
And just to keep the MLAs and the Hessians in order, Michael will be sending an email out to remind us all not to come here next week, but instead go to Antrim. And the meeting is therefore adjourned.